Welcome to Anime Audiobook. Naruto, Copy System. Chapter 51, The Chunin Exams. Half a month passed in a flash. During this time, Shin and his team continued to carry out D-rank missions under the guidance of their temporary Jonin sensei, Asakawa Ki. One day, Tsunade finally returned, looking exhausted from her journey. "Tsunade, what mission were you on? It took you so long?" Shin asked curiously. "I was in the Land of Wind, investigating the movements of Tsunagakuer. I'm afraid things are about to get a bit turbulent in the shinobi world," Tsunade replied after taking a long drink of water. Suna had been showing signs of activity, which Konoha's intelligence network picked up on. The Sandaime Hokage, Sarutobi Hiruzen, had dispatched Orochimaru, Tsunade, and Jiraiya to investigate. It had been a while since the First Shinobi World War. The various hidden villages had been bolstering their forces, and the war hawks were starting to gain influence. Tsunade's investigation revealed that Suna was indeed preparing for war, and their target was Konoha. Konoha was always the target, not just because of its strength, but also because of the Land of Fire's strategic location and resources. Compared to the fertile and prosperous Land of Fire, the Land of Wind, where Suna resided, was practically barren. Shin nodded. It seemed the Second Shinobi World War was drawing near. The Second Shinobi World War involved Konoha, Suna, Iwa, and Omegakure. Omegakure, from the small nation of the Land of Rain, would become the main battleground. "By the way, although I'm back, I still don't have time to take you on missions," Tsunade said. She had other duties to attend to. With Suna preparing for war, Konoha had to make its own preparations. As one of Konoha's top Jonin, Tsunade couldn't rest. She would be joining the Konoha forces heading to the border soon. "That's fine. We're planning to take the Chunin exams," Shin said casually. Once they became Chunin, they wouldn't have to do those pointless D-rank missions anymore. They could take on C-rank or even B-rank missions. Tsunade frowned. "You're taking the Chunin exams now?" She wasn't keen on them becoming Chunin at this time. With the war looming, they might be sent to the battlefield. Tsunade hadn't experienced the horrors of war herself, but she knew how dangerous it was. "Yet, doing missions in the village is boring. We want to become Chunin and see the world." They hadn't left Konoha since that mission with Tsunade. "If you've made up your mind, I won't stop you." Tsunade considered Shin's strength. There wasn't much to worry about. He was stronger than her. And if he had decided, she couldn't change his mind. "What's the Chunin exam process like now?" Shin asked. "Simple. Survive a spar against an elite Chunin for 3 minutes, and you pass," Tsunade explained. The current Chunin exams weren't as complicated as the Chunin exams in the future. As long as you could prove you had the strength of a Chunin, you passed. Surviving 3 minutes against an elite Chunin was proof enough. They prepared for a day, and the next morning, they applied to take the Chunin exams. The Sandaime Hokage examined their applications. As Hokage, he had to review all Chunin applications. Chunin were the core fighting force of a hidden village. Hiruzen couldn't neglect this matter. Especially with Uzumaki Shin, Uzumaki Kushina, and Uchiha Mikoto. 2 Uzumaki and 1 Uchiha. He had to pay attention. "You're sure you want to apply to become Chunin?" The Sandaime looked at the 3 genin, who were currently in his office. "Yes, we've made up our minds." "Very well. I will arrange your exam. But if you fail, even as Tsunade's students, you won't become Chunin." He stamped their applications, approving their request. He then assigned an Anbu agent to escort them to the exam location. The exam was held in one of Konoha's training grounds. 3 elite Chunin soon arrived. One of them had the Uchiha clan symbol. I am your examiner. You will each face one of these elite Chunin. As long as you can last 3 minutes, you pass. The Anbu agent said coldly. What's with that icy tone? It's like we owe him money, Kushina grumbled. Ignore him. All talk, no action, Shin whispered back. That was how he saw Anbu. They acted tough, but they rarely achieved anything. I'll take the Uchiha, Shin said to Kushina and Mikoto. He hadn't expected an Uchiha to be here. He suspected it was a deliberate arrangement by the Sandaime Hokage. He was right. The Uchiha elite Chunin was indeed assigned by Hiruzen. Uchiha were naturally stronger than most. In a one-on-one fight, they rarely lost. Kushina and Mikoto had no objections. The exam was a series of one-on-one battles, but they would be held simultaneously. The training ground was large enough. Shin walked towards the Uchiha, while Kushina and Mikoto faced the other 2 Chunin. The Anbu agent with the animal mask watched from the side, a detached observer. That prying feeling. Is that the Sandaime? Shin sensed someone watching him and frowned. It had to be the Sandaime Hokage using the telescope jutsu. To use the telescope jutsu, one needed to know the target's chakra signature. The Sandaime wasn't familiar with Shin's chakra, but he could use someone else's vision, like that of Shin's opponent. You chose me. It seems you don't want to become a Chunin. The young Uchiha said calmly. Skip the trash talk and let's fight. Shin drew his Kusanagi sword and attacked. Knowing that Hiruzen was watching, Shin held back. He didn't want to reveal too much of his strength. Chapter 52, 52, Hiruzen Sarutobi's invitation. Clang! Shin struck the Uchiha elite Chunin with the flat of his blade. The force of the blow sent the Chunin flying, his grip loosening on his kunao. Shin frowned. He had held back considerably, yet the Chunin was still so easily defeated. How weak! In the Hokage's office, Hiruzen watched with surprise. That was quite a display of strength. But the boy was an Uzumaki, it wasn't that surprising. The Uzumaki clan was known for their strong bodies, vitality, and large chakra reserves. Attacking with the flat of your blade, are you mocking me? The Uchiha Chunin had his pride. Shin's action had wounded it deeply. Better to be mocked than dead, Shin said calmly. The Kusanagi sword was incredibly sharp. It could easily slice through the Chunin's kunao. If Shin hadn't held back, the Chunin would be dead. But the enraged Chunin didn't care. He attacked with ninjutsu. Fire style, fireball jutsu. Shin simply swung his sword, cleaving the fireball in 2. The Anbu examiner was startled. Could swordsmanship be that powerful? He rarely saw kenjutsu used like this. Sharingan. 2 Tomo appeared in the Chunin's eyes. He was serious now. Shin used the body flicker jutsu, appearing before the Chunin in an instant. He punched the Chunin in the gut, sending him crashing to the ground. I passed, right? Shin asked the Anbu examiner. The examiner nodded, his shock evident despite the mask. Defeating an elite Chunin in under a minute, was this kid a genius? 10-year-old Chunin weren't unheard of in Konoha. Orochimaru had become a Chunin at 10. But defeating an elite Chunin at that age, that was rare. Only one other person came to mind, Sakumo Hatake, Kakashi's father. In the Hokage's office, Hiruzen pondered. Judging from Shin's performance, his strength was easily at Takebutsu Jainin level. Shin hadn't used any ninjutsu, so Hiruzen couldn't assess his skills in that area. But one thing was certain, this boy was a genius. Hiruzen was already considering recruiting Shin into the Anbu. After Shin's battle ended, Kushina and Mikoto also defeated their opponents. The Anbu examiner was stunned. One genius was rare, but three at once, this was unprecedented. Come with me to the Hokage's office. He escorted them back to the office and reported the results to Hiruzen. Hiruzen was also surprised. He had stopped observing after Shin's fight. He hadn't expected Kushina and Mikoto to defeat their opponents as well. Defeating an elite Chunin within 3 minutes meant their strength surpassed that of an elite Chunin. 3 geniuses at once. Hiruzen was speechless. I'm pleased you all passed the Chunin exams. I have a question for you, would you be willing to join the Anbu? Hiruzen extended the invitation to all 3 of them. He had initially only considered Shin, but now that he knew Kushina and Mikoto were also geniuses, he couldn't let them go. The Anbu, or the Anbu Black Ops, is a special assassination and tactical squad. Only the most elite shinobi are allowed to join. He explained, in case they weren't familiar with the Anbu. Kushina and Mikoto indeed weren't familiar with the Anbu, but Shin was. Almost every hidden village had an Anbu organization. But joining the Anbu, no, that had never crossed his mind. What were the benefits with his current strength? He didn't need the Anbu's training. And joining the Anbu meant a life of secrecy and restrictions. Sandaime-sama, I don't believe I'm worthy of being called an elite shinobi yet. I'm not qualified to join the Anbu. Shin refused. Kushina and Mikoto, following Shin's lead, also refused. If Shin wasn't joining, they weren't interested either. Hiruzen frowned. He was displeased. Being rejected after personally extending an invitation didn't sit well with him. Won't you reconsider? The Anbu can help you improve your skills. He was still trying to persuade them. If you join the Anbu, I'll reward you with a B-rank jutsu. Shin scoffed inwardly. A B-rank jutsu, that was all he was offering. How stingy. Even if Hiruzen offered an S-rank jutsu, Shin wouldn't be tempted. He wouldn't be lacking in S-rank jutsu in the future. Besides, Hiruzen wouldn't be that generous. We're not interested in joining any organization. We prefer freedom. And as for strength, we're not worried about that. Shin was firm in his refusal. Hiruzen sighed, giving up. He could see that Shin had no interest in the Anbu. There was no point pushing it. It would only damage his pride further. Very well. Since you're not interested, I won't force you. Here are your Chunin certificates. From now on, you are Chunin of Konoha. Hiruzen handed them their certificates. After they left, Hiruzen pondered. He might not have been able to recruit them into the Anbu, but he couldn't let anyone else poach them either. Especially not Dan's root or the Uchiha clan. Mikoto was an Uchiha. Once they learned of her talent, they would definitely try to recruit her. No, he couldn't allow the Uchiha clan to have another powerful shinobi. With their ambition, they might cause trouble for the village in the future. Thankfully, Shin, Kushina, and Mikoto were all students of his disciple, Tsunade. If Dan's or the Uchiha tried to recruit them, he had a legitimate reason to intervene. He couldn't allow the Uchiha clan to become too powerful, nor could he allow Dan's root to grow unchecked. Too much power would lead to them escaping his control. As Hokage, he couldn't allow any faction within the village to become too strong. Chapter 53, 53, B-rank Mission, Hunt down a missing nin. When Shin and his team returned to the Senju compound, Tsunade was already there. Seeing them, she asked, "Done with the exam?" "Yes, I'm a Chunin now," Kushina announced proudly. It's just Chunin. What's there to be proud of? Tsunade said, glancing at Kushina. The Sandaime Hokage tried to recruit us into the Anbu, Shin said, looking at Tsunade. And you agreed? No way. Joining the Anbu is boring. I crave freedom, not a life hiding in the shadows like a rat. Tsunade was speechless. He compared the Anbu to rats. If the Anbu heard that, they'd probably come after him. I'm heading to the border tomorrow. Be careful when you go on missions, especially you two. Listen to Shin. Tsunade looked at Kushina and Mikoto. She was mainly talking to Kushina. Mikoto was obedient and cautious, she wouldn't cause trouble. Kushina, on the other hand. Got it, Tsunade. You be careful too, Kushina said. Tsunade was surprised. She had expected Kushina to argue, but she actually sounded concerned. If the war breaks out, be careful on the battlefield. We don't want to hear any bad news, Shin added. Tsunade was fine in the original story, but things might be different now. Don't worry, no one can defeat me. Just don't be reckless and charge at cage-level opponents. If you're in danger, sell out your teammates. Let Orochimaru and Jiraiya take the hit. Especially Orochimaru, he's hard to kill. Shin offered his advice. Tsunade's eye twitched. What kind of advice was that? Relax, the war won't start that easily. It might just be a show of force, Tsunade said dismissively. Shin shook his head. He knew this war would definitely happen, and it wouldn't end quickly. The next morning, Tsunade left for the Land of Fire's border. Hiruzen had mobilized a force of 3,000 shinobi. Including Genin, Konoha had a little over 10,000 shinobi. 3,000 was a significant force. Let's go on a mission and have some fun outside the village, Shin said to Kushina and Mikoto. The mission was secondary, exploring the world was the real goal. At the mission assignment desk, they ran into Nawaki and his team. Shin, you're here. I thought you weren't coming, Nawaki said. Nawaki, we probably won't be able to do missions with you anymore. Nawaki was confused. Why not? We passed the Chunin exams. We're Chunin now. We won't be doing D-rank missions anymore. You should try it too, Nawaki. Kushina answered. We graduated together. Why did you become Chunin without telling me? Nawaki whined. Don't worry, Nawaki. Genin are the strongest in Konoha. They can destroy the world. Shin patted Nawaki's shoulder and took the mission list, scanning it. S-rank mission, capture S-rank missing nin Uchiha. Shin froze. Uchiha, if he remembered correctly, that was the guy he had a minor conflict with at the ramen shop. He had also copied Ryuta's Sharingan prowess 4 times. But how did he become a missing nin and an S-rank one? At that S-rank missing nin varied in strength, but they were generally cage level or quasi-cage level. Sorry, wrong list. The clerk took the list back. These are S-rank and A-rank missions. Chunin can't take those. Here's the correct list. He handed Shin another list. What are the requirements for taking S-rank missions? Shin asked. You need a team of at least 3 elite J-nin, the clerk replied. Fine. I'll take this mission to hunt down a Konoha missing nin. Shin chose a mission to hunt down an elite Chunin level missing nin. It was a B-rank mission. Are you sure you want to take this mission? Is there a problem? Shin frowned. Could they not even take B-rank missions? He had looked at the C-rank missions, they were all escort missions or bandit extermination. He wasn't interested in those. You can, but it's dangerous. You 3 are newly promoted Chunin. We'll take it, Shin said firmly. He wasn't worried about danger. Hunting down a Chunin-level missing nin shouldn't be a problem. The clerk shrugged and handed Shin the mission details. It wasn't his problem if they failed. We're still stuck with D-rank missions, and you're already doing B-rank. Noeki, Minato, and the others looked at them with envy. They also wanted to do higher-level missions. D-rank missions were mind-numbingly boring. We're going on a mission. We'll treat you all to dinner when we get back, Shin said to them. They left Konoha. Unbeknownst to them, Hiruzen was informed of the mission they had taken. Hunting down an elite Chunin-level missing nin with their strength, they shouldn't be in any danger. Hiruzen estimated Shin's strength to be around Takubitsu Jainin level. Kushina and Mikoto could also defeat elite Chunin. He didn't think Shin was Jainin level yet. A 10-year-old Jainin was too absurd, even for him. Meanwhile, Dans was also informed. Uzumaki Shin, Uzumaki Kushina, and Uchiha Mikoto have left Konoha. This is our chance. I don't want another failure. Understand? Dans looked at the kneeling root member. His previous attempt to kill Tsunade and capture Shin had failed miserably. He had sent members to investigate, but they found nothing. The bodies had been disposed of. Dans blamed Hiruzen for this. Hiruzen was also puzzled by Kato Dan's disappearance. He had sent Anbu to investigate, but they found nothing. He eventually concluded that Dan had been killed by enemy ninja. Chapter 54, Genjutsu, Tsukuyomi. After leaving Konoha, Shin took out the mission details. It contained information about the missing nin they were hunting. The missing nin's name was Kawada Hiwa. His strength was at the level of an elite nin. He had defected after accidentally killing a comrade during a heated argument. He had been gone for half a year and was suspected to be hiding in the land of whirlpools. Shin paused when he saw that. Kushina, peering over his shoulder, also froze. "We're going to the land of whirlpools?" Kushina asked, looking up at Shin. "Yeah, I wonder what it's like now." Mikoto looked at them. She knew the land of whirlpools was their former home, a place filled with both good and bad memories. "When we left, I didn't think we'd ever go back." Shin wasn't one to dwell on sentimentality. "We'll have to take a ship." "Do you get seasick, Mikoto?" "I've never been on a ship before." "I don't know," Mikoto replied. Kushina's face paled. She suddenly remembered her unfortunate tendency to get seasick. "Can we not take a ship?" she asked weakly. "Sure, you can always run there on water." Shin offered an alternative. It wasn't entirely a joke. The land of whirlpools wasn't that far from the land of fire. It was doable. "Okay, let's run to the land of whirlpools," Kushina declared, clapping her hands. Shin shrugged. He didn't mind. "But before we go, we have a tale to deal with. I don't like being followed. Come on out." Shin's voice turned cold. The root member hiding in the shadows was startled. Discovered? How did he know? Since he had been found out, there was no point hiding. As an elite Jainin, he didn't need to rely on sneak attacks to deal with 3 Chunin. An Anbu. Kushina and Mikoto saw his attire and assumed he was Anbu. "Not Anbu. Root. Dan's lackey. One of the guys who attacked us before," Shin corrected them. Hearing that he was one of Dan's men, Kushina and Mikoto prepared for battle. From Shin and Tsunade, they had learned that Dan's was a bad guy. Just how much does that geezer Dan's hate me? Shin wondered. He had barely left the village, and Dan's had already sent someone after him. "You bastard! You killed my comrades! Dan-sama ordered me to kill you. You're here to kill us. Kushina clenched her fists, ready to fight. She wasn't going to be bullied. But Shin stopped her. Kushina, he's an elite Jainin. You're not strong enough. If it were a regular Jainin, he might let Kushina spar with him, but against an elite she didn't stand a chance. An elite Jainin, fine, I'll let you off the hook for now. Kushina stepped back, letting Shin handle this. She wasn't worried. She had seen Shin slaughter elite Jainin before. I'll use you to test my genjutsu. Shin hadn't had a chance to test his genjutsu since acquiring the Kurama clan's Kekii Genkai. This was the perfect opportunity. Dan's was a lifesaver, sending him a free sparring partner. Shin looked at the root member, and in a flash, pulled him into a genjutsu world. This world was constructed from Shin's imagination. It was a dark and eerie place. The root member found himself bound to a cross. Is this genjutsu? He wasn't panicked. He tried to disrupt his chakra flow to break free. But to his horror, it didn't work. He couldn't even sense his chakra. It was as if he had become a normal human. It's useless. Enjoy your suffering. Shin drew his sword and used the root member as a training dummy, slashing and stabbing him repeatedly. The member didn't know how many times he died. Each time he was killed, he would revive, only to be killed again. After dozens of deaths, his eyes glazed over, his mind broken. In this genjutsu world, everything, including time, space, and even the laws of physics, was under Shin's control. It was a mental assault that could crush even the strongest minds. Shin's genjutsu was similar to the Manjiki Sharingan's Tsukuyomi, which Obito had called the ultimate mental attack. Of course, Obito's words weren't always trustworthy, but Tsukuyomi was undeniably powerful. Shin didn't have Tsukuyomi. His Manjiki Sharingan abilities were Yamatsu Hirasaka and Tenmame. This Tsukuyomi-like genjutsu was something he had developed after copying the Kurama clan's Kekii Genkai. He called it Tsukuyomi as well. Its effects were the same as the original Tsukuyomi. He didn't bother thinking of a new name. Once the genjutsu was released, Shin looked at the unconscious root member and shook his head. A single Tsukuyomi had broken him. Shin hadn't even used his other genjutsu, the one that could control the five senses. What happened to him? Kushina asked. They hadn't even fought, and the guy was already down. From their perspective, Shin had simply looked at the man, and he had collapsed. Was it genjutsu? Mikoto asked. Yep, Shin confirmed. Looking at the unconscious root member, Shin threw a kunao, piercing his heart. He wouldn't show mercy to his enemies. Mercy to the enemy was cruelty to himself. He lived by that motto. In the world of shinobi, there was no room for sentimentality. We can't leave the body here. Shin thought for a moment, then incinerated the corpse with a fireball jutsu. They continued on their journey to the land of whirlpools. Dans didn't yet know that he had lost another elite Jainin. Dans didn't have many elite Jainin to spare. Including Kato Dan, Shin had now killed 4 of them. Dans must be furious. Perhaps after this, he would stop targeting Shin. He had already suffered heavy losses. Until he understood what was happening, he wouldn't dare attack Shin again. Elite Jainin weren't easy to replace. Training one took years. Dans couldn't afford to lose any more. Chapter 55, The girls team up. After 2 days of travel, Shin and his team finally arrived in the land of whirlpools. This is the land of whirlpools. Mikoto looked around in surprise. There was no one in sight, only dilapidated buildings. It is. Looks a bit run down, doesn't it? Shin surveyed the surroundings. It wasn't always like this. It used to be a beautiful country. But after the Uzumaki clan was destroyed, the land of whirlpools ceased to exist. The people of the land of whirlpools had abandoned the island nation after the Uzumaki clan's downfall. It's so big. How are we supposed to find that missing nin? Kushina asked. The land of whirlpools wasn't huge, but it wasn't small either. Finding someone here would be difficult. Don't worry, I have the mind's eye of Kagura, Shin reminded her. Finding an ordinary person might be challenging, but finding a shinobi was easy. He could sense chakra within a radius of several dozen kilometers. As long as the missing nin had chakra, he couldn't escape Shin's detection. After some searching, Shin finally sensed a chakra signature. But its location was unexpected. Did you find him? Kushina asked impatiently. Yeah, but he's at our old house. Kushina was surprised, and Mikoto looked curious. Their old house, let's go. Shin led Kushina and Mikoto towards their former home. Is this where you used to live? Mikoto asked Kushina. Yeah, this was our house. I can't believe someone's squatting here now. Kushina was indignant. Even though they had abandoned it, it was still their home. Hey, you squatter! Get out here! Kushina yelled. Kawada Hiwa, the missing nin, emerged from the house. He wore a Konoha forehead protector with a scratch across it, signifying his status as a missing nin. Shin didn't understand why missing nin still wore their old forehead protectors. Was it to show which village they had betrayed? Who are you? Hiwa frowned at them. He had been here for a while and hadn't seen anyone else. You're Kawada Hiwa, the Konoha missing nin, right? We're here to take you down. Hiwa burst out laughing. Is Konoha that desperate, sending 3 brats after me? He scoffed. Don't underestimate us. Shin, you stay back. I'll take him. Kushina declared. Shin nodded. He wasn't planning on interfering anyway. This mission was mainly for Kushina and Mikoto's benefit. Kushina, Mikoto, he's all yours, Shin said. I can handle him myself. Kushina used the adamantine sealing chains. Several chakra chains erupted from her back, whipping towards Hiwa. Hiwa's eyes widened, and he leaped back, narrowly dodging the attack. You're not getting away that easily. The chains, under Kushina's control, pursued him relentlessly. Mikoto activated her Sharingan. She could see Hiwa's movements clearly. She swiftly threw several shuriken, blocking his escape routes. Hiwa's face paled. If he dodged the chains, he would be hit by the shuriken. And he didn't have time to use the substitution jutsu. Mikoto had seized the perfect opportunity. Even Shin was impressed. Nice teamwork, Mikoto and Kushina, he praised. Damn it! 2 little girls, cornering me like this. A shuriken was embedded in Hiwa's arm, blood dripping to the ground. He had chosen to block the shuriken with his arm to avoid the chakra chains. Kushina, keep attacking. Don't let him use any jutsu. Mikoto instructed. Jutsu required hand seals. If he couldn't form hand seals, he couldn't use jutsu. Kushina nodded and disrupted his attempts to weave hand seals with her chains. The intel was wrong. This guy is stronger than an elite Chunin. His speed is comparable to a Janin's. Shin observed Hiwa's movements. If he were just an elite Chunin, he wouldn't be able to dodge Kushina's adamantine sealing chains so easily. Fire style, Dragon Flame Jutsu. Mikoto seized the opportunity and unleashed a stream of fire towards Hiwa. The Dragon Flame Jutsu was only a C rank, but it could still kill. The human body was fragile. The flames could pierce a tree, burning through flesh was no problem. Kushina's chains closed in from all sides, leaving Hiwa with no escape. You think you can kill me with just this water trumpet? Trapped, Hiwa used a water jutsu to counter Mikato's flames. But the moment he did, Kushina's chains bound him tightly. It was a fatal blow. He had avoided being burned, but he couldn't escape the chains. As a ninjutsu specialist, he didn't have the strength to break free. The adamantine sealing chains could even restrain tailed beasts. I never thought I'd be defeated by two little girls, Hiwa said, his voice filled with regret. There's a lot you haven't thought of. You underestimated us. Still think we're weak, Kushina sneered. If you kill me, you'll only get a measly reward. Why not let me go? I'll give you all my jutsu and money. Hiwa tried to bargain. Do you think jutsu can be measured with money? Kushina and Mikoto looked at Shin. The decision was his. Kill him, Shin said coldly. What jutsu could this guy possibly have that would interest him? Mikoto threw a kunao, ending Hiwa's life. Their mission was complete. But Shin wasn't planning on returning to Konoha yet. He had come all this way, he wasn't going to rush back. Chapter 56, Infiltrating Kirigakure. Kawada Hiwa is dead. Are we going back? Mikoto asked Shin. Shin, let's stay out here and play for a bit longer, okay? Kushina pleaded, tugging on his arm. Call me big brother, and I'll agree, Shin said with a smirk. No way. I'm older than you. You should be calling me big sister. Kushina retorted, turning away with a huff. Kushina, you're older than Shin. Mikoto looked at Kushina in surprise. She hadn't noticed. Of course. I was born 3 days earlier. Kushina said proudly. What's there to be proud of? Shin flicked her forehead, earning him a yelp. Seeing her pout, Shin quickly changed the subject. We're not going back to Konoha just yet. You agreed. Kushina's pout vanished, and she clung to his arm excitedly. We're going to the land of water. Shin looked towards the land of water. The land of water, why? Kushina and Mikoto asked in unison. Kirigakure was definitely involved in the Uzumaki clan massacre. Time to collect some interest. But is it safe to go there, just the three of us? Mikoto asked worriedly. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. We won't be in any danger. Shin smiled confidently. In the current shinobi world, even Madara Uchiha couldn't threaten him. If he couldn't win, he could always escape. They left the land of whirlpools and returned to the land of fire, then took a ship to the land of water. We can't escape the fate of riding a ship, Kushina grumbled. Kushina, just because you got seasick last time doesn't mean you will this time. See, you're not feeling sick at all. Shin reassured her. After a day's journey, they arrived on a small island in the land of water. It wasn't the main island, but one of the smaller ones surrounding it. This time, Kushina didn't get seasick, and neither did Mikoto. Kushina, Mikoto, I've scouted the island. It's safe. Stay here for now. Shin said. He had already told them about his plan to infiltrate Kirigakure. He wasn't taking them with him. He could protect himself, but taking Kushina and Mikoto into Kirigakure was too risky. I know we'll just hold you back, so we won't go. But you have to be back within 3 days, or we'll come looking for you. Kushina said seriously. She wasn't going to throw a tantrum and demand to go with him. She knew she'd be a burden. But she set a deadline. If Shin didn't return within 3 days, she would go to Kirigakure to find him. "Shin, be careful," Mikoto said. "Don't worry, I can always escape if I can't win. With my space-time ninjutsu, no one can stop me," Shin said confidently. He had a trump card, after all. Kirigakure wasn't the weakened village it would become after the Bloody Mist era. It was still a powerful force. Shin was strong, but he couldn't take on an entire village alone. Only those at the level of Madara Uchiha or Hashirama Senju could do that. It took him less than half an hour to reach the main island. After asking around, he found the location of Kirigakure. He killed a Kiri shinobi and used the transformation jutsu to disguise himself, entering the village undetected. The guards at the village gates couldn't see through his disguise. The current Mizu cage is the third Mizu cage. I wonder how strong he is. Shin sat in a ramen shop, pondering. Information on the third Mizu cage was scarce. Shin didn't even know his abilities. But he was sure the third Mizu cage wasn't that strong. If he were, he wouldn't have been controlled by an elderly Madara Uchiha. Although it wasn't explicitly stated, Shin suspected that the third Mizu cage had been under Madara's control during the Third Shinobi World War. He didn't know if that was still the case. He finished his ramen. It was quite good. Shin had several objectives in Kirigakure. One was to acquire Kekii Genkai. The Kagaya clan in Kirigakure possessed the Shikatsu Miyako Kekii Genkai. They were suspected to be related to Kagaya Tsutsuki. Perhaps Shikatsu Miyako was derived from the all-killing ash bones. It was just speculation, but it didn't really matter. Shin wasn't interested in copying Shikatsu Miyako. He had 2 reasons. First, it had a drawback, the Shikatsu Miyako disease. Although he had the perfect sage body and theoretically shouldn't be affected, he didn't want to risk it. Second, not every Kagaya clan member possessed Shikatsu Miyako. Perhaps there weren't any with an awakened Kekii Genkai right now. He wanted the ice release of the Mizunashi clan. OC clan of Hiton, ice release. And he also wanted the Forbidden Scroll, which contained Kirigakure's secret jutsu. First, copy ice release. Then, try to steal the Forbidden Scroll. The scroll was a valuable item, obtaining it wouldn't be easy. Shin didn't have high hopes. He used his Sharingan to hypnotize several Kiri shinobi and learned the location of the Mizunashi clan. He infiltrated the Mizunashi clan compound and copied the ice release from a clan member. Not every Mizunashi had awakened ice release. It took Shin a while to find a suitable target. He used an advanced replication card. He now had 1 advanced card left and 1 common card. Although he had copied the ice release Kekii Genkai, he didn't know any ice release jutsu. To avoid causing a commotion, he didn't search for any scrolls within the Mizunashi clan compound. It didn't matter. He was confident he could create his own ice release jutsu, and they would be even stronger than the Mizunashis. He went to a small forest in Kirigakure and waited for nightfall. Copying ice release was done. Stealing the Forbidden Scroll during the day was too risky. He would wait until the dead of night. In the shinobi world, the dead of night wasn't the best time to act. Shinobi were more alert at night. The best time was just before dawn, when their guard was down. Shin decided to wait. He leaned against a tree and refined chakra. He also activated the mind's eye of Kagura, scanning Kirigakure. Chapter 57, 57, The Forbidden Scroll Acquired. At 4 in the morning, Shin opened his eyes, transformed his appearance into that of an adult, and donned a 3-tomo Sharingan mask. This mask was identical to the one Obito Uchiha wore during the Fourth Shinobi World War. He couldn't use his true appearance to steal Kirigakuru's forbidden scroll. Whether he succeeded or failed, he would become a wanted man. You coveted the Uzumaki clan's sealing jutsu. Now it's my turn to covet yours. Shin smirked, his figure melting into the darkness. At this hour, the night was still deep. Shin moved swiftly towards the Mizukage tower. Who's there? He had barely entered the building when he was discovered. He sighed inwardly. Despite his strength, he was still a novice at infiltration. Sneaking into Kirigakure was one thing, but infiltrating the heavily guarded Mizukage tower was another. Hey, guys, I'm just here for a stroll. Trust me? Shin asked the Anbu surrounding him. Kirigakure's Anbu were dressed differently from Konoha's Anbu, but the differences were minor. They also wore masks to conceal their identities. The Kiri Anbu glared at him, their killing intent palpable. You're clearly here to cause trouble. A stroll yet, right? They were especially annoyed by Shin's mask. Everyone was wearing masks, but his was way cooler. Sorry to bother you. Goodbye. Shin used the body flicker jutsu to escape. The Anbu immediately gave chase. Once they were gone, Shin emerged from the shadows. Idiots! Fooled by a shadow clone. The one who had escaped wasn't the real Shin. He had used the substitution jutsu to swap with a shadow clone. He was too fast, they hadn't noticed the switch. Shin quickly made his way to the Mizukage's office. Such an important item would definitely be kept there. He had already scanned the office with the mind's eye of Kagura. The third Mizukage wasn't there. The Mizukage had to sleep, after all. He wouldn't be staying in his office. And since there had never been an incident of someone infiltrating the Mizukage tower, the security wasn't as tight as Shin had expected. Genjutsu, Kaika Suijutsu. This was the five senses control of the Kurama clan. Shin had given it a name, Kaika Suijutsu. It could only briefly control the five senses, unlike Aizen's complete hypnosis, but Shin liked the name. Although it wasn't as powerful as Aizen's Shikai, it had an advantage. It didn't require eye contact. Shin could control the target's five senses without them even seeing him. After activating Kaika Suijutsu, Shin swaggered into the Mizukage's office. The guards stationed outside didn't react. Their five senses were under his control. They saw and heard what Shin wanted them to see and hear. Under this genjutsu, they were puppets, unaware of their surroundings or even their own deaths. Shin wondered why the Kurama clan, with such a powerful Kekii Genkai, was still a small clan. They couldn't use it as effectively as him, though. Their mental power was weaker, and their chakra reserves were smaller. The stronger the jutsu, the greater the chakra cost. They couldn't afford to use it often. Even Kurama Kaze, the only Kurama with an awakened Kekii Genkai, struggled to control the five senses of a single Jainin. Shin started searching the office, but he couldn't find the forbidden scroll. He almost turned the place upside down. Could it be somewhere else? He frowned. He continued searching, and finally, he found a hidden compartment. Inside was the forbidden scroll of Kirigakure. It was a huge scroll with the words Forbidden Scroll clearly written on it. There was also another sealed scroll beside it. Shin took that as well. Anything kept with the Forbidden Scroll had to be valuable. Just as he secured the scrolls, a group of Anbu stormed in. Welcome back, Shin greeted them casually. Bastard! The one who escaped was your shadow clone. The Anbu leader roared. They hadn't caught the clone, but they had realized they had been tricked. They rushed back, but it was too late. Shin had already found the forbidden scroll. The third Mizukage also arrived. Someone must have informed him of the commotion. He entered his office and saw the open compartment. His face hardened. "Where's the forbidden scroll? Hand it over." He glared at Shin. "You think I'd return something I already have?" Shin looked at him as if he were an idiot. "Who are you?" The Mizukage didn't attack. He questioned Shin's identity. This intruder had guts, infiltrating Kirigakure and stealing the forbidden scroll. And he was so calm, facing him and the Anbu. He was either an idiot or had a trump card. "Who am I?" Shin smirked. "I am Uchiha Madara." He altered his voice, mimicking Madara's tone. The Mizukage paused, then scowled. "You're mocking me? Do you think I'm that gullible?" Everyone knew Uchiha Madara was dead. He had fought Hashirama Senju in the Valley of the End and been killed. Hashirama had also been mortally wounded in that battle. The deaths of Hashirama and Madara had triggered the First Shinobi World War. If either of them had survived, no one would have dared to start a war. Why would I lie to a mere child? Shin's Mangeki Sharingan activated, his imposing aura pressing down on the Mizukage. The Mizukage stumbled back, staring at the Mangeki Sharingan in fear. Even those outside Konoha knew of the Mangeki Sharingan, the ultimate jutsu that had allowed Madara Uchiha to dominate the shinobi world. Chapter 58, 58, The Might of Susanoo. In the Mizukage's office, Shin stared coldly at the third Mizukage. Neither the Mizukage nor the Anbu made a move. The Anbu looked at the Mizukage nervously, waiting for his orders. "Who are you impersonating? Uchiha Madara? Do you think I don't know that he was killed by the Shadame Hokage in the Valley of the End?" The Mizukage's voice was glacial. Shin scoffed. There was no need to explain. The more he said, the more likely he was to slip up. He could escape now that he had the forbidden scroll, but he couldn't leave without making an impression. This was also for revenge for the Uzumaki clan. Susanoo. Black chakra materialized around Shin, forming arms and ribs, then a skeletal frame. Muscles and tendons appeared, followed by a flesh-like covering. Finally, a Tengu-like armor materialized, completing the 50-meter-tall warrior god, a long katana strapped to its waist. Shin's Susanoo was black, like Amaterasu flames, an intimidating demonic figure. The only flaw was that it only had an upper body. He needed the eternal Mangeki Sharingan to manifest the full-bodied Susanoo. It was difficult to use the perfect Susanoo with just the Mangeki Sharingan. In the original story, only Kakashi had done it during the Fourth Shinobi World War. And Kakashi had only been able to use it because he had received Obito's chakra, which contained remnants of the Sage of Six Paths power. Shin's current Susanoo couldn't have legs, but he was still a genius for manifesting the strongest form possible with the Mangeki Sharingan. His immense ocular power and chakra reserves made this possible. The moment his Susanoo appeared, the Mizukage tower was reduced to rubble. The Mizukage and the Anbu were sent flying by the shockwave. Some of the weaker Anbu were killed instantly. The third Mizukage stared at the 50-meter-tall Susanoo in terror. It was like facing a tailed beast, no, something even stronger. He almost believed Shin was Uchiha Madara. He had never seen Madara Uchiha in person. He didn't know that Madara's Susanoo was blue, while Shin's was black. Shin grumbled. His Susanoo only had a katana, and it didn't have any special abilities. He looked at the Mizukage and the others, a cold smile hidden behind his mask. They couldn't see his expression, but they could sense the danger. The Mizukage didn't bother warning the others. He used the body flicker jutsu to escape. Just as he moved, the Susanoo's massive fist slammed down, crushing several Anbu where they stood. Even those who weren't crushed were injured by the shockwave. As expected from Susanoo. This destructive power is insane. Shin was pleased. Damn it! Water style, Great Waterfall Jutsu. The Mizukage watched in fury as over a dozen of his men were killed, including several Jainin. Jainin were elite forces. Losing so many in an instant. He had to do something. The Great Waterfall Jutsu was an A-rank ninjutsu that created a massive torrent of water, powerful enough to rival a natural disaster. But it had no effect on the Susanoo. The attack even destroyed several buildings in Kirigakure. Other shinobi attacked with kunao, explosive tags, and shuriken, but their attacks couldn't penetrate the Susanoo's defenses. The Susanoo's defenses were among the strongest in the shinobi world. And its offensive power was even greater. Shin slowly drew the katana from the Susanoo's waist. The Mizukage tensed. Defend! He roared. This giant could cause unimaginable destruction with its fists. With the sword he didn't even want to imagine it. The Mizukage and the other shinobi formed a water wall. Will this even work? Shin drew the black katana. Slash! The black blade flashed, cleaving through the water wall and bisecting the shinobi in its path. The others were blown away by the force of the attack. I like this feeling. Shin smiled, enjoying the overwhelming power. The ground cracked, a long fissure snaking outwards. Some shinobi fell into the chasm, breaking their limbs. Shin's single slash had killed dozens. They wanted to dodge, but the attack was too fast. To ordinary shinobi, the Susanoo was a weapon of mass destruction. Their attacks couldn't harm it, but it could easily wipe them out. Stop this! Whether you're Uchiha Madara or not, as the Mizukage, I won't allow you to wreak havoc in my village. The third Mizukage charged towards the Susanoo. Shin watched calmly. The Mizukage's attacks couldn't harm the Susanoo. To break through its defenses, he needed powerful jutsu, which the Mizukage clearly didn't have. Ignoring the Mizukage, Shin turned his attention to the other shinobi. Attacking the Mizukage was pointless. As a kage, he was difficult to kill quickly. The Mizukage might not be able to harm the Susanoo, but killing him wouldn't be easy either. Shin couldn't stay in Kirigakure for long. The Jinchuriki and other powerful shinobi would arrive soon. He had to take advantage of the situation before they arrived. He wasn't strong enough to take on the entire village yet. If all of Kirigakure's forces gathered, even his Susanoo would be destroyed. It wasn't the perfect Susanoo, after all. Ignoring the Mizukage, Shin swung the Susanoo's sword, each swing claiming several lives. He was a Grim Reaper, harvesting souls. Chapter 59, Leaving in Style. The fury of Kirigakure. The deafening roar of the Susanoo echoed throughout Kirigakure, sending villagers scrambling for safety as ninja ushered them away. Powerful shinobi converged on the ruins of the Mizukage Tower, their faces contorted with rage as they beheld the towering Susanoo. Kagaya clan, attack! The Kagaya clan head, a fierce warrior, led the charge, followed by a horde of battle-hungry Kagaya. Tisk! More and more are gathering. Shin noticed cracks appearing on the Susanoo's armor, but he wasn't worried. Ants can still bite an elephant to death. The relentless attacks were taking their toll. Even the Susanoo was starting to buckle. Seeing the widening cracks, Shin quickly channeled chakra to repair the damage. The Kiri shinobi, who had cheered at the sight of the damaged Susanoo, now felt despair as the cracks vanished. Sensing their despair, the third Mizukage yelled, "Don't give up! Maintaining that Susanoo must be draining. We can outlast him." He was right. The Susanoo was powerful, but it consumed a lot of energy. Shin could handle the chakra consumption, but it was also draining his ocular power. His Manjaki Sharingan couldn't withstand prolonged use. He cut down several Kaguya with his sword, then deactivated the Susanoo. He couldn't afford to exhaust his ocular power. He needed it to escape with Yamatsuya Hirasaka. He's weakening. Keep attacking! The third Mizukage shouted excitedly. Fire style, Great Dragon Fire Jutsu! A massive fire dragon erupted, incinerating several Kiri shinobi before being extinguished by the Mizukage's water-style jutsu. Kill him! The Mizukage roared. A barrage of ninjutsu, kunao, and shuriken rained down on Shin. I'm done playing with you. Shin activated Yamatsuya Hirasaka, stepping through a portal. The portal vanished, and the attacks missed their mark. Mizukage-sama, he's gone. An elite Jainin reported. The Mizukage's face was grim. Kirigakure had suffered heavy casualties, and they hadn't even captured the intruder. They didn't even know how he had escaped. Search the entire village. I don't believe he can escape Kirigakure. Find him! The Mizukage roared in fury. They had lost over 300 shinobi, including Jainin, and even elite Jainin. The Susanoo's destructive power was immense. If the Mizukage hadn't ordered the weaker shinobi to retreat, the casualties would have been even higher. And they hadn't even injured the intruder. He had even stolen the Forbidden Scroll. The loss of the Forbidden Scroll was a devastating blow. It contained many of Kirigakure's secret jutsu. Fire! Fire! We need to put out the fires! A shinobi shouted. The Mizukage snapped out of his rage and looked around. Fires were raging throughout the village. Shin had set the village ablaze with shadow clones before escaping. Shin watched the burning village without a shred of sympathy. Kirigakure had been involved in the Uzumaki clan massacre. He wouldn't show them any mercy. Time to go. He had what he came for. He had taken his revenge. It was time to leave. He used Yamatsuya Hirasaka to teleport back to Kushina and Mikoto. It was still early morning, the sky still dark. Kushina and Mikoto were asleep in a tent they had set up. Shin appeared inside the tent. Kushina and Mikoto woke up instantly, reaching for their kunao. Good, you're alert, Shin said, pleased. It was important to be vigilant, especially when outside the village. Shin, you're back. Kushina launched herself at Shin, and Mikoto also rushed over. Shin, are you hurt? Mikoto scanned him for injuries. Of course not. Those Kiri weaklings couldn't even touch me. Shin reassured Mikoto. They hadn't been able to break through his Susanoo's defenses. And even if he had been injured, he could always use Tenmame to rewind time and heal himself. Relieved that he was unharmed, Kushina and Mikoto went to prepare breakfast. Shin was hungry, so they got to work. Breakfast in the wilderness was barbecue. Shin went hunting, Mikoto prepared the ingredients, and Kushina gathered firewood. While Shin and his team enjoyed their breakfast, the Kiri shinobi were fuming. They had extinguished the fires Shin had set, but the damage was extensive. The third Mizukage personally led the search for Shin, but they couldn't find him. Shin had already left. How could they find him? Mizukage-sama, what should we do? We can't let this go. The Kiri shinobi were frustrated and angry. They were one of the 5 great villages. Someone had infiltrated their village, killed hundreds of their shinobi, burned down countless houses, and escaped. This was a disgrace. If they found Shin, they would make him pay. The Mizukage was the most furious of all. He had failed to protect the Forbidden Scroll. He had no face left. He opened his eyes, which were usually closed, revealing a chilling glint. He was a Tojitam, someone with perpetually closed eyes, and when a Tojitam opened their eyes, it meant trouble. Uchiha. Konoha. He gritted his teeth. He would make Konoha pay for this. He wouldn't let this go. Shin had claimed to be Uchiha Madara, but the Mizukage didn't believe that. But he was certain the intruder was an Uchiha. Calm the villagers. I will handle this, the Mizukage said to the other shinobi. He would send someone to Konoha to demand an explanation. The Manjiki Sharingan was unmistakable. He would hold Konoha and the Uchiha clan accountable. Shin had tried to use Madara as a scapegoat, but the Mizukage didn't believe Madara was alive. Now Konoha and the Uchiha clan would bear the brunt of his anger. Chapter 60, Steaming Danger Tyranny. Shin took out the Forbidden Scroll and the other sealed scroll he had acquired. These scrolls weren't easily opened. They were protected by seals. An ordinary person wouldn't be able to access the jutsu within, but Shin was different. He was an Uzumaki. Mito had taught him everything she knew about Finjutsu. Sealing Jutsu. Shin easily dispelled the rudimentary seals and opened the Forbidden Scroll. It contained many water-release jutsu. What's that? Kushina and Mikoto approached, their eyes fixed on the large scroll. This is one of my trophies from Kirigakure, their Forbidden Scroll. Unfortunately, there aren't many jutsu worth learning. Shin schemed through the scroll. The strongest jutsu was probably the second Mizukage Steaming Danger Tyranny. This jutsu was known as the Infinite Explosion Ninjutsu. It created clones with the appearance of children, formed from oil and water. These clones were fast, agile, and could explode repeatedly. The outer layer of the clones was made of oil, while the inside was filled with water. Once the clone moved, the oil would heat up rapidly, causing the water to evaporate and create a steam explosion. The clone would then shrink and absorb the surrounding water vapor to create more explosions, an endless cycle. But this powerful jutsu had a drawback: it weakened the user. The second Tsuchikage's body was covered in bandages because he had been burned by this jutsu during a battle with the second Mizukage. Besides this jutsu, there was also the Hazuki clan's water gun jutsu, a B rank, and the A rank water style, Great Waterfall Jutsu. There was also a terrifying genjutsu from the first Mizukage, Mirage. But it required the summon, the clam, to use. So, no matter how powerful it was useless to Shin. Besides, Shin didn't need it. His genjutsu was far superior, thanks to his Manjiki Sharingan and 5 senses control. See if there's anything you want to learn. Shin handed the scroll to Kushina and Mikoto. He was disappointed. Kirigakure was so weak. There wasn't a single jutsu that caught his eye. Perhaps his standards were too high. He was looking for jutsu with immense destructive power. Ordinary jutsu didn't interest him. While Kushina and Mikoto looked through the scroll, Shin unsealed the other scroll. It contained money. A lot of money. 10 billion ryo, to be exact. It must have been Kirigakure's budget. Shin had inadvertently stolen their funds. Looks like we won't have to worry about money anymore. Shin smiled faintly. Kushina, however, tossed the Forbidden Scroll aside and hugged the pile of money. Kushina, you're such a money grubber, Shin teased. This is all mine now, Kushina declared, sealing the money back into the scroll. Kirigakure must be furious, Mikoto said worriedly. Shin knew what she was worried about. Don't worry, Mikoto. No matter how much they investigate, they won't find me, and by the time they do, it'll be too late. No one would suspect him. His age was his best disguise. And he had used the transformation jutsu in a mask. By the time Kirigakure discovered the truth, it would be too late. He would be strong enough to crush them. Even if they found out, they wouldn't be able to do anything. They'd have to swallow their anger and accept their loss. Let's go to the main island of the Land of Water, Shin said. Shouldn't we leave the Land of Water? Kirigakure won't let this go, Mikoto said. They had stolen the Forbidden Scroll, it was too dangerous to stay. It would be a shame to leave just like that. Let's explore the Land of Water and broaden our horizons. I agree. Kushina chimed in. Seeing Mikoto's worry, Shin smiled. Don't worry, Mikoto. Even if we're discovered, I can get us out of here. Yamatsuo Hirasaka ignored distance. He could teleport them back to Konoha, though the chakra cost would be immense. By the way, do you want to learn any of the jutsu in the Forbidden Scroll? Shin asked. I don't have water release chakra. Most of the jutsu in there are water release, Mikoto said. She was a genius, possessing wind, lightning, and yin release. Chakra natures could be acquired through training, but it was a long and arduous process. Having multiple innate chakra natures was definitely an advantage. I'll try to learn some, Kushina said. She had wind, water, and yang release. She could learn water jutsu, and she had taken an interest in the steaming danger tyranny. It was an S-rank jutsu. Seeing Shin use the Rasen Shuriken, she understood the power of S-rank jutsu. Their destructive power and range were terrifying, even on the battlefield. Ordinary shinobi had limited chakra. Even if they learned an S-rank jutsu, they could only use it as a trump card. But Kushina, as an Uzumaki, had enough chakra to spam S-rank jutsu. Of course, that was in the future. Currently, her chakra reserves weren't that vast. Once she reached cage level, her chakra would rival that of a tailed beast. Perhaps not the 9 tails, but at least the 8 tails. Shin used Yamatsuo Hirasaka to transport them to the main island of the Land of Water. There were people here. The Land of Water doesn't seem as prosperous as the Land of Fire, Kushina observed, looking at the houses and the people's attire. It was clearly a step down from the Land of Fire. In terms of wealth, no other nation could compare to the Land of Fire, thanks to its fertile lands and strategic location. Chapter 61, 61, The Third Mizukage Demands Justice. In the Hokage's office, Hiruzen Sarutobi puffed on his pipe, a troubled expression on his face. The sudden arrival of a delegation from Kirigakure, led by the third Mizukage himself, was unexpected. Hiruzen couldn't believe that the Mizukage had came to Konoha. He wouldn't dare visit another hidden village. If the village had ill intentions, even a powerful shinobi could be captured or killed. Unless you were at the level of Hashirama Senju or Madara Uchiha, visiting another village was practically suicide. Although the delegation was led by the third Mizukage, Hiruzen wasn't entirely sure it was really him. The third Mizukage was shrouded in mystery. Even Hiruzen didn't know what he looked like. Kirigakure was an isolated village, rarely interacting with the mainland. And the third Mizukage was a reclusive leader. It wasn't surprising that Hiruzen didn't know him. Hiruzen pondered the situation. The door opened, and Dans entered, along with the two elders, Homura Mitokato and Koharu Udaten. Hiruzen had summoned them to discuss the third Mizukage's visit. You know why I called you here? The third Mizukage has suddenly visited Konoha. What do you think his motive is? Hiruzen got straight to the point. He had already met with the Mizukage, but the meeting hadn't gone well. The Mizukage had been blunt and accusatory. Although Hiruzen was angry, he kept his cool and arranged for them to stay at Konoha's guest house, treating them with courtesy. Whatever his reason, as a Kage, leaving his village to visit another is foolish. Dan scoffed. With Suna making moves against us, now is not the time to fight Kirigakure. Hiruzen looked at Dan sternly. This was one of the reasons he had summoned Dan's, not just to discuss the Mizukige's visit, but also to warn him. Dan's met his gaze and nodded. He wasn't stupid enough to act rashly. Attacking the Mizukage now would only bring trouble. Besides, he wasn't even sure if it was really the third Mizukage. He didn't believe the Mizukage would do something so reckless. Unless they had a very close relationship, a Kage wouldn't risk visiting another hidden village. Hokage-sama, the Kiri delegation requests an audience. A shinobi entered and announced. Hiruzen frowned, then nodded. Bring them to the meeting room. Let's go meet them. Hiruzen led Dan's and the elders to the meeting room. The third Mizukage and several elite Genin were already waiting. It was indeed the Mizukage. The third Mizukage is quite young, Dan's remarked, looking at the Mizukage. Indeed, compared to Hiruzen, the Mizukage looked much younger. Sandaime Hokage, I'm here to demand justice. The Mizukage ignored Dan's and glared at Hiruzen. Dan scowled but didn't say anything. He sat down, followed by Homura and Koharu. Hiruzen frowned. Konoha and Kiri had no conflict. What justice was the Mizukage talking about? Your Konoha shinobi infiltrated my village and stole our forbidden scroll. What do you have to say for yourself, Sandaime Hokage? The Mizukage stood up, his eyes narrowed dangerously. Killing intent filled the room, prompting Konoha's Anbu to emerge from the shadows. Mizukage-sama, are you mistaken? Hiruzen was confused. He had never sent anyone to steal Kirigakure's forbidden scroll. Could it be Dan's? He glanced at Dan's, then shook his head. Dan's didn't have the ability to pull off something like that. Honestly, even Hiruzen didn't think he could infiltrate Kirigakure and steal the forbidden scroll. The scroll was a valuable item, it would be heavily guarded. And even if someone managed to steal it, they'd have to escape Kirigakure's forces. But seeing the Mizukage's fury, it seemed the scroll was indeed gone. Humph! Can't even protect your own village's forbidden scroll. Useless! Dan sneered. The Mizukage, who usually had a calm demeanor, was enraged. He slammed his hand on the table, shattering it. Hiruzen glared at Dan's, then looked at the Mizukage. Mizukage-sama, how do you know it was a Konoha shinobi? The Sharingan. The Manjiki Sharingan. You can't fake that. Besides the Uchiha clan of Konoha, who else possesses the Sharingan? Hiruzen's face hardened. Dan's and the elders also paled. Hand over the forbidden scroll, or Kirigakure will declare war. The Mizukage's voice was firm. He had to retrieve the scroll, or his position as Mizukage would be in jeopardy. There were already dissenting voices in Kirigakure, criticizing his leadership and calling for his removal. The other clans were eager for him to step down. If he did, they would have a chance to take his place. That was why he had risked coming to Konoha. He had to retrieve the forbidden scroll. Hiruzen took a deep breath. If he didn't handle this carefully, Konoha and Kirigakure would go to war. And if that happened, Suna, who was already making moves, would definitely take advantage of the situation. Iwa, who had a grudge against Konoha, and Kumigakure, with their ambitions, might also join in. It could escalate into a four-village alliance against Konoha. Konoha was strong, but even they couldn't withstand an attack from four other hidden villages. The stakes were high. He had to appease the Mizukage. Hiruzen looked at Dan's, then said, "Mizukage-sama, I won't lie to you. It's been a long time since the Uchiha clan has produced a Mangekyou Sharingan user. But recently, one did awaken the Mangekyou Sharingan. However, he is now a missing nin of Konoha." Chapter 62, 62, The Scapegoat. The third Mizukage's expression darkened. He didn't believe Hiruzen's claim that the Uchiha who stole the Forbidden Scroll was a missing nin. He saw it as a flimsy excuse. "Do you think Kirigakure is afraid to go to war with Konoha?" The Mizukage stood up and glared at Hiruzen. "I know you suspect I'm lying, Mizukage, but he really is a missing nin. He defected a year ago. You can investigate if you don't believe me," Hiruzen said calmly. "His name is Uchiha Ryota. Feel free to investigate. He's the only one I know of with the Mangekyou Sharingan. He's been classified as an S-rank missing nin." Hiruzen was indeed referring to Uchiha Ryota, the one Shin had seen on the mission list. He glanced at Dan's. Ryota's defection and Mangekyou Sharingan awakening were connected to Dan's. Ryota was talented and powerful, a genius of the Uchiha clan. Naturally, he had caught Dan's attention. Dan's had tried to recruit Ryota into Root, but Ryota had refused and even injured the Root agents sent to persuade him. This had offended Dan's, who believed that any talented shinobi who wouldn't serve him should be eliminated, especially an Uchiha. Dan's had captured Ryota's parents and used them as bait to lure Ryota into a trap. He didn't know what had happened after that. All he knew was that all his men were dead, and so were Ryota's parents. The last report he received was that Ryota had awakened the Mangekyou Sharingan. Hiruzen had learned of this incident and helped Dan's clean up the mess. Otherwise, with the Uchiha clan's genius suddenly becoming a missing nin, and with evidence pointing to Dan's involvement, the Uchiha clan wouldn't have let it go so easily. Hiruzen had appeased the Uchiha clan with various concessions. But now this had happened. Had Ryota become that strong enough to infiltrate Kirigakure and steal the Forbidden Scroll? Hiruzen was worried. Ryota's parents were dead, killed by Dan's men. Would Ryota seek revenge on Konoha? The world only knew of Madara Uchiha's Mangekyou Sharingan, but Hiruzen had another teammate, Uchiha Kagami, who had also awakened the Mangekyou Sharingan, though he was now deceased. As Kagami's teammate, Hiruzen understood the terror of the Mangekyou Sharingan. And the more he understood, the more worried he became. This was all Dan's fault. He had to stop Dan's from doing whatever he pleased, even if he claimed it was for Konoha's sake. But was it truly for Konoha's sake? Perhaps Konoha held some importance in Dan's heart, but it definitely wasn't his top priority. Dan's was a selfish man, he only cared about himself. After a lengthy discussion, Hiruzen finally managed to appease the Mizukage. The Mizukage left, determined to declare war on Konoha if he discovered Hiruzen had lied to him. Hiruzen breathed a sigh of relief, then turned to the Anbu. "Find Uchiha Ryota. We have to find him. Leave Uchiha Ryota to me. I will find him and eliminate this threat." Dan's eyes gleamed. Hiruzen took a deep breath. "Can your Root handle him? You know how powerful the Mangekyou Sharingan is. To be able to infiltrate Kirigakure single-handedly and steal the Forbidden Scroll." Hiruzen didn't believe Kirigakure was that weak. He was wary of Ryota now. The Mangekyou Sharingan was the eye that could subdue even tailed beasts. He was overestimating Ryota, though. It was Shin who had infiltrated Kirigakure, not Ryota. If Ryota had tried, he would have been killed instantly. Ryota was just a scapegoat, blamed for something he didn't do. And now he would be hunted by both Kirigakure and Konoha. Especially Kirigakure. If they found him, even the Mizukage might personally pursue him. And if Shin learned that Ryota had the Mangeki Sharingan, he might hunt him down to copy it. Ryota's situation was tragic. He might as well change his name to Uchiha Dead Meat. Meanwhile, the true culprit was still enjoying himself in the land of water. This croquette is disgusting. Shin tossed the croquette aside. It was made with squid meat and tasted fishy. Kushina and Mikoto also made faces and discarded their croquettes. How can you make croquettes with squid? Do they even know how to cook? Kushina complained. Look, they seem to be enjoying it. Maybe it's just their taste, Mikoto said. Just because they didn't like this strange croquette didn't mean others didn't. The takoyaki here is good, Shin. Try it. Kushina offered Shin a takoyaki ball. It is good. And cheap too. Anything seafood related was cheap in the land of water. As an island nation, they had plenty of seafood. We've been in the land of water for days. When are we leaving? Kushina asked. She wasn't used to the land of water. It was humid, and there was always a thick fog in the mornings and evenings. And the worst part was the fishy smell that blew in from the sea when it was windy. The locals were used to it, but Kushina wasn't. The land of whirlpools was also an island nation, but it was closer to the mainland and had a different climate. Kushina wasn't used to it, and neither was Mikoto. Even Shin found it a bit unpleasant. Let's leave today then, Shin said. He decided to take Kushina and Mikoto to a food street in one of the towns before they left. They might not come back to the land of water again, so they might as well enjoy a feast. Chapter 63, Bonus, Developing Ice Release. Return to Konoha. Shin and his team left the land of water, but instead of returning to Konoha, they went back to the land of whirlpools. They built a small hut near the coast. Kushina and Mikoto sparred on the beach, trying to gain combat experience. But it wasn't very effective. They were just sparring, they weren't using any dangerous jutsu or trying to kill each other. Shin sat by the shore, developing new jutsu. He wanted to create ice release jutsu. He had the ice release Kekkei Genkai, but he didn't know any ice release jutsu. He reviewed his knowledge of jutsu and recalled ice-based abilities from his past life. Those abilities could serve as inspiration. Perhaps he could adapt them into ninjutsu. There were many ice-based abilities, such as the Hai no Mi from One Piece, Aesthethus Taiga from Akame ga Kill, and even the ice manipulating stand, White Album, from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. There were many powerful ice abilities, but replicating them with ninjutsu would be challenging. After much deliberation, Shin realized that adapting those abilities into jutsu wasn't something he could achieve in a short time. I'll have to create ice release jutsu based on existing jutsu. Shin sighed. He would have to put in some effort, but ice release was a powerful element, worth the effort. He used the multi-shadow clone jutsu to create 1,000 clones and set them to work, experimenting and researching ice release. Shin, are you sure you're okay? Mikoto approached him, concerned. Creating 1,000 shadow clones wasn't just physically taxing, it was also mentally demanding. If he dispelled all those clones at once, the mental fatigue could be overwhelming, potentially even fatal. Don't worry, I know my limits, Shin reassured her with a smile. He wouldn't let the clones research for too long. He would maintain control, ensuring he didn't damage his mind. Mental fatigue was inevitable, but he wouldn't harm himself. In fact, after the fatigue subsided, his mental power would increase. This was another method he had discovered for strengthening his mind. But it wasn't something most people could handle. Without immense willpower, they wouldn't be able to endure the mental strain. A week passed. They had been away from Konoha for almost half a month. Shin had developed 3 ice release jutsu: Ice Wall, Ice Spear, Ice Dragon Bullet Bomb. These were his original creations. Well, not entirely original. They were modified versions of existing jutsu. Ice Wall was based on the Water Wall jutsu. But even though it was based on an existing jutsu, the hand seals were different. It was a completely new jutsu, just like the Earth Release, Earth Wall. Ice Spear was based on Kakuzu's Earth Spear, and Ice Dragon Bullet Bomb was based on the Water Dragon Bullet jutsu. These were all at least B-rank jutsu. And this was just the beginning. Shin would continue to develop even stronger jutsu, such as an Ice Age jutsu that could freeze the sea between islands, or even a time-stop jutsu. He believed that with enough time, he could achieve anything. "Let's pack up and head back to Konoha," Shin said to Kushina and Mikoto. They had been away for a while. He wondered if the Sandaime Hokage would send someone to look for them. After all, they weren't ordinary ninja. They were all talented. She was eager to return. The land of whirlpools was scenic, but it was deserted and boring. And Shin had been busy developing jutsu, so he hadn't had time to play with her. Mikoto had also been busy training. Kushina was bored and wanted to go home. They used water walking to travel across the sea, their chakra-coated feet gliding over the waves. Running on water in the open sea was more challenging than on a river. The waves were stronger. But it didn't stop them. Their chakra control was excellent, they could handle most waves. It took them a few days to reach Konoha. As soon as they returned, Hiruzen was informed. So was Dan's. Hiruzen was relieved. He didn't want to lose these talented youngsters. Dan's, however, was furious. He had sent someone to capture Shin when they left the village. Although he had a bad feeling when he didn't hear back from his elite Jainin, Shin's return still angered him. His subordinate must have failed. As for how, he had no idea. He wanted to capture Shin and his team and interrogate them, but Hiruzen was keeping a close eye on him. If he made any moves within Konoha, Hiruzen would find out. Dan's might be good at operating in the shadows, but he couldn't hide everything from Hiruzen. Shin and his team went to the mission assignment desk and completed their mission. After receiving their reward, they returned to the Senju compound. Hiruzen didn't summon them. As long as they were back, he didn't care about the details. And he wasn't surprised that they had taken so long. Missions to hunt down missing nin could take a while. Finding the target wasn't easy. Finally home. Kushina looked around the familiar courtyard with a sense of relief. Mikoto smiled. "You two rest for a bit. I'll make dinner." "Don't bother, Mikoto." Shin stopped her before she could enter the kitchen. Seeing her confused expression, he smiled. "You just got back, no need to tire yourself out. Let's eat out. I've been craving Konoha's food." "I agree." Kushina chimed in. Mikoto nodded and sat down. Chapter 64, The Kumo Attack. Shin, Kushina, and Mikoto strolled through Konoha's bustling food street. "We're finally rich. We can buy anything we want." Kushina clutched a handful of snacks, her eyes scanning the stalls for more treats. "We weren't exactly poor before, but now we're loaded," Shin said. With the 10 billion ryo he had swiped from Kirigakure, they wouldn't have to worry about money for a while. "Let's go get some yakiniku." Shin led Kushina and Mikoto into a popular yakiniku restaurant. "Shin!" a familiar voice called out. "Nawaki, you're living the good life. Eating yakiniku looks like you're rolling in dough. Shin teased Noeki. Of course. I've made a lot of money lately. I even completed a C-rank mission outside the village. Noeki said proudly. Do missions really take that long? You were gone for over half a month. Noeki was curious about their long absence. Yeah, some missions take time, Shin said vaguely. He couldn't tell Noeki the truth. What he had done could make him an enemy of Kirigakure. If Kiri found out he was the one who infiltrated their village, killed their shinobi, and stole the forbidden scroll, they would demand Konoha hand him over. And knowing Hiruzen, he might actually do it. If word got out, Shin might become an enemy of not just Kiri, but Konoha as well. By the way, Noeki, are you here alone? Shin changed the subject. Nope, I'm with some friends. They're not here yet. I came to reserve a table. Who's coming? Kushina asked. My team, and Minato's team. We're still working together. Shin, Kushina, and Mikoto used to be part of their group, but after becoming Chunin, they had moved on to higher-level missions. Since we're all here, let's eat together. My treat. Noeki said grandly. No, it's my treat. I promised to buy you all dinner when we got back. Shin shook his head. The food here was good, but it was also expensive. Noeki's allowance probably wouldn't cover it. Well, if you insist. Noeki grinned. They reserved a large private room. Soon, Minato, Akiko, Psum, Hayashi, and Kai arrived. Kai's expression changed when he saw Shin, but he remained silent. Shin was surprised to see Kai there. He wasn't exactly the social type. Shin, you're back. Minato and the others greeted them with surprise. Yep, that mission was tough. Shin lied. Kushina and Mikoto had been the ones who defeated the missing nin, he hadn't even lifted a finger. I want to go on B-rank missions too, Minato said enviously. After completing a C-rank bandit extermination mission, he was eager for more challenging tasks. Actually, after this trip, I realized it's better to stay in the village. We're not taking any missions for a while. Shin said. It was the truth. He wanted to focus on developing his ice release. Training was more important than pointless missions. After dinner, Shin and his team headed back to the Senju compound with Noeki. Akiko and Kai, however, went in a different direction. What's going on? Don't they live in the Senju compound too? Why aren't they going home? Kushina was puzzled. Didn't you know Akiko moved out last week? Then Kai suddenly moved out too, Noeki explained. Oh, and there's something else. Noeki's expression turned mischievous. Akiko seems to like Minato. Shin, Kushina, and Mikoto remained expressionless. They already knew. Noeki was disappointed, then continued, Shin, you must be wondering why Kai came with us today. He has a crush on Akiko, so he tagged along. Still no reaction. Noeki, I figured that out back in the academy. You're just realizing it now. Oh. So you knew. Noeki was surprised. Hey. Shin suddenly stopped, his eyes fixed on a nearby alley. What's wrong? Mikoto asked softly. No point hiding. Come on out, Shin said calmly. What? Noeki looked at Shin, confused. Kushina and Mikoto, however, drew their kunao, their eyes alert. I can't believe a brat like you discovered us. 3 shinobi emerged from the alley. They were tall and muscular, with dark skin and a powerful aura. You're from Kumagakure, aren't you? Shin asked. The leader of the Kumo shinobi was about to speak, but Shin's question surprised him. They really are from Kumo. Shin saw their surprised expressions and confirmed his suspicions. He had never seen shinobi with such dark skin in Konoha. Only those from the land of lightning had that skin tone. It was easy to tell. He hadn't been entirely sure at first, but their reaction confirmed it. Their hostility was clear. They were here for them, or rather, for the Uzumaki. In the original story, Kushina had been captured by Kumo. Even though the timeline had changed, it seemed Kumo was still targeting Kushina. Capture the two Uzumaki brats. Kill the other two. Be quick. Don't attract the Anbu's attention. The Kumo leader lunged at Shin. Chapter 65, 65, Ice Release Annihilates Kumo Shinobi. In the dim alleyway, a wall of ice, shimmering with a pale blue light, blocked the Kumo captain's grasping hand. Ice release. The captain stared at the ice wall in surprise. You're quite knowledgeable, Shin said with a smirk, his eyes fixed on the three Kumo shinobi like a predator sizing up its prey. Humph! I'll shatter this ice wall. The captain channeled chakra into his fist and punched the ice wall. His attack resembled Tsunade's monstrous strength, but it was weaker. His fist struck the wall, causing barely a tremor. Weak. Shin muttered. He wasn't trying to be insulting, he genuinely thought the captain was weak. Enraged, the captain called out to his comrades, and they unleashed a triple lightning release attack. Electricity crackled as they channeled lightning through their hands, using the earth as a conduit to attack Shin. But the lightning strikes were blocked by the ice wall. Lightning release, double lariat. The captain focused lightning chakra into his elbow and slammed it into the ice wall. Cracks spread across the surface. It was an Intaijutsu technique, a combination of ninjutsu and taijutsu, similar to the chidori, but using the elbow instead of the hand. Not bad. You managed to crack the wall. You're quite strong. Shin looked at the captain with an appreciative smile. You're asking for it. The captain couldn't stand Shin's patronizing attitude. Ice release, ice dragon bullet bomb. Shin's hands moved in a blur, forming hand seals with incredible speed. 6 seals in 2 seconds. An ice dragon emerged, roaring towards the captain. It slammed into him, sending him flying, then continued its trajectory towards another Kumo shinobi. The ice dragon opened its jaws and swallowed the shinobi whole, freezing him solid. Crack! The ice dragon shattered, and the frozen shinobi within crumbled into a pile of ice shards. One left. Ice release, ice spear. Several ice spears materialized before Shin, then shot towards the last Kumo shinobi, piercing his heart and limbs. Is that one dead too? Kushina pointed at the captain, who had been sent flying by the ice dragon. Not yet, but he's as good as dead. An ordinary shinobi would have been killed by the impact, but this was a Kumo Jainin, a master of nintaijutsu. His body was more durable, so he was still clinging to life. But he was barely alive. His bones were broken, his internal organs ruptured. He was better off dead. What happened? Nawaka stammered, finally snapping out of his shock. He stared at the scene in horror. The shinobi who had been swallowed and frozen by the ice dragon. It was too much for him. He had seen blood before, but nothing this gruesome. As you can see, they were Kumo shinobi. They attacked us, and we retaliated. Why are you so shocked, Nawaka? Don't you have any guts? Shin shook his head at Nawaka. Nawaka was bewildered. Shin, Kushina, and Mikoto seemed unfazed. Was he really that weak-minded? Kushina and Mikoto had witnessed far more gruesome scenes. They were somewhat desensitized to violence. "Let's wait for the Anbu," Shin said, sitting down. The commotion wasn't huge, but it wasn't small either. The Anbu would have noticed. Besides their main duties, the Anbu were always lurking in the shadows, protecting Konoha. Unless it was in a remote training ground or the forest, any significant disturbance would attract their attention. This was practically the center of the village. Attacking here was foolish. Shin frowned. They had just returned to Konoha, and these Kyumo shinobi had attacked them. It was strange. "Shin, what are you thinking?" Mikoto asked. "I'm thinking their real target might not be us. This wasn't a good place for an attack. It was too close to the Hokage Tower, and the security was tight. Attacking here would attract attention. Or perhaps that was their goal. To distract Konoha's forces while their accomplices carried out their true objective." If Shin's guess was correct, their real targets were Kai and Akiko. He was right. That was their plan. Sacrifice 3 of their own to distract Konoha while the others captured their targets. Shin and his team hadn't been part of the original plan. When they formulated their plan, Shin and his team weren't even in Konoha. They had intended to attack Noeke to draw attention. Noeke was the grandson of Hashirama Senju. He was a potential threat, so they wanted to eliminate him, and even if they couldn't kill him, they could use him as a distraction while their accomplices captured Akiko and Kai. The 3 Kyumo shinobi had been surprised to see Shin and Kushina. They had done their research before infiltrating Konoha. They knew Shin and Kushina weren't in the village. Their targets were Akiko and Kai. But seeing Shin and Kushina, they decided to capture them as well. Then, they became test subjects for Shin's new ice release jutsu. Noeke had been lucky. If Shin and his team had returned a day later, he might be dead. Of course, he didn't know how close he had come to death. "Shin, you think their real goal was to kidnap Akiko and Kai?" Kushina and Mikoto were surprised by Shin's theory. "It's just a guess. I'm not sure." But he was at least 80% sure. "Should we go save them?" Noeke asked. "How if Shin's right? It's too late. They must have already made their move." "I hope Akiko's okay," Kushina said. She didn't care about Kai, but she still hoped Akiko was safe. Shin also hoped Akiko was fine. The 9 tails hadn't been transferred yet. If something happened to Akiko, he and Kushina would be in trouble. Minato had left with them. Hopefully, he was strong enough to protect them. Chapter 66, 66, Hiruzen wants to introduce his niece. It didn't take long for the Anbu to arrive. They examined the bodies of the 3 Kyumo shinobi. Shin couldn't see their expressions behind their masks. "What happened here?" one of the Anbu questioned them. The others continued to inspect the bodies. "We were attacked by Kyumo shinobi. We killed them in self-defense." "Oh, and they said their accomplices were going after Akiko and Kai." Shin reported. "What, you? Take them to the Hokage's office. The rest of you, with me." The Anbu squad leader immediately left with 3 other Anbu. Akiko was under the Sandaime Hokage's protection, she couldn't be harmed. He didn't have time to verify Shin's claims. If something happened to Akiko, it would be too late. "You 3, follow me to the Hokage's office. You need to report this to the Sandaime Hokage." The remaining Anbu said to Shin and his team. Shin shrugged and followed the Anbu, Kushina and Mikoto trailing behind him. Noeke also tagged along, not wanting to be left alone with the corpses. Shin's use of ice release had been exposed, but he didn't care. If he had wanted to keep it a secret, he wouldn't have used it against the Kyumo shinobi. Ice release wasn't his trump card, not yet anyway. They arrived at the Hokage's office, and the Anbu agent reported the incident to Hiruzen. Hiruzen immediately dispatched several Anbu squads to retrieve Akiko. He then turned his attention to Shin and the others. Shin, Naoki, Kushina, Mikoto, are you all alright? Hiruzen asked with concern. Thank you for your concern, Sandaime-sama. We're not injured. Shin looked at Hiruzen, knowing the Hokage was about to get down to business. As expected, Hiruzen asked, Shin, those ice jutsu you used earlier. What was that? It's my Kekii Genkai, Shin replied truthfully. Hiruzen was taken aback. Wasn't the Uzumaki clan's Kekii Genkai the sage body? Had Shin developed a new Kekii Genkai besides Kekii Genkai like the sage body, Sharingan, and Byakugan? It was possible to develop new elemental Kekii Genkai. By combining two different chakra natures, one could create a new type of jutsu. This was a Kekii Genkai. Ice release was a combination of wind and water release. The Mizunashi clan of Kirigakura also possessed ice release. And once a Kekii Genkai was successfully developed, it could be passed down to future generations. OC clan of ice release. You developed it yourself? Hiruzen asked. Yeah, I stumbled upon it by accident, Shin said casually. Hiruzen's lips twitched. This wasn't just genius, it was monstrous. He had never heard of anyone developing a Kekii Genkai at the age of 10. He didn't know that Shin had copied the ice release. He assumed Shin had developed it himself. He didn't ask how Shin had done it. In the shinobi world, it was taboo to pry into someone's Kekii Genkai or jutsu. Besides, developing a Kekii Genkai often involved luck. Some stumbled upon it accidentally, while others spent their entire lives researching without success. It mainly depended on the ratio of the two chakra natures being combined. Even those who had successfully developed a Kekii Genkai couldn't explain the exact process. They often experimented until they suddenly succeeded. So, luck was a factor. Even if Hiruzen asked, Shin couldn't answer. He hadn't developed the ice release himself. Ahem, Shin, are you married? Hiruzen suddenly asked. Shin stared at him, bewildered. I have a niece around your age. I could introduce you. The temperature in the room plummeted. Kushina glared at Hiruzen, her body radiating killing intent. Mikoto's smile vanished, replaced by a frown. Naoki shivered. Why were Kushina and Mikoto so scary? Shin's eye twitched. He knew what Hiruzen was thinking. Kekii Genkai could be passed down. That was Hiruzen's motive. No, thank you, Shin refused politely. Kushina and Mikoto were glaring at him. He had to prioritize his safety. Besides, he didn't know if Hiruzen's niece was even pretty. If she was, he might consider it. But considering the Sarutobi clan's unique looks, he decided against it. He preferred humans. Hiruzen was embarrassed, but thankfully, several Anbu entered the room, saving him from further awkwardness. Hokage-sama, we brought Uzumaki Akiko. They had also brought Minato and Kai, all three of them injured. Seeing Akiko safe and sound, Hiruzen sighed in relief. She was already being groomed as the Jinchuriki. If something happened to her, finding a replacement would be troublesome. Are you sure those shinobi were from Kumo? Hiruzen asked the Anbu. Judging from the jutsu they used, it's highly likely. The Anbu couldn't be completely sure. It was possible that shinobi from another village were impersonating Kumo. They would need to investigate further. Hiruzen nodded and asked about Minato and the others' injuries. He was mainly concerned about Akiko, though. She was too important. After a brief questioning, Hiruzen dismissed them. As they left the Hokage Tower, Shin sensed two Anbu following them. Or rather, following Akiko. He didn't care, as long as they weren't following him. Chapter 67, 67, All Things Can Be Copied. Akiko, are you alright? After leaving the Hokage Tower, Kai asked Akiko with concern. Akiko shook her head at Kai, then looked at Minato. Thank you, Minato. If it weren't for you, I would have been captured. Akiko looked at Minato gratefully, her cheeks flushed. Don't mention it. We're teammates. Minato smiled back. Kai scowled. He had helped rescue Akiko too. Why was she only thanking Minato? Shin, Kushina, and Mikoto walked behind them. Shin couldn't help but chuckle. Kai, hearing Shin's chuckle, turned around angrily. What are you looking at? Want to fight? Kushina threatened, raising her fist. Her threat wasn't very convincing, but Kai was intimidated nonetheless. Kushina had taught him a lesson before, he didn't want to repeat, especially not in front of the girl he liked. Shin and his team parted ways with Minato's team. Shin sensed the two Anbu agents following Minato and the others. Good. No one was following him. He didn't want to be monitored. Back at the Senju compound, Shin and the girls returned to Tsunade's courtyard, while Nawake went to his own residence. It's late. Let's take a bath and get some rest, Shin said. He went to his room, while Kushina and Mikoto went to theirs. Shin lay on the tatami mat, but he couldn't sleep. I'll chat with the system and ask some questions. He called out to the system in his mind. System, are you there? Always at your service, Master. System, how are missions assigned? Shin asked. When he infiltrated Kirigakura and stole the Forbidden Scroll, he had expected the system to issue a mission, but nothing happened. System missions are random. The difficulty and rewards are also random. Shin was disappointed. He preferred patterns to randomness. System, can replication cards copy anything? Only divine replication cards can copy anything. Common and advanced cards have limitations. Can you copy a person? Yes. The required card level depends on the person's strength. Cage level or above requires a divine replication card. With a divine card, even a world can be copied. All things can be copied. Shin was surprised. The difference between advanced and divine cards was vast. What level of card would I need to copy myself? Shin asked curiously. Due to your perfect sage body, you would require a divine replication card. Shin nodded. He was just curious, he wouldn't actually copy himself. Everyone wanted to be unique. System, I think there should be more card levels. He felt the gap between advanced and divine cards was too large. You can anticipate a system upgrade, Master. After the upgrade, there might be new card levels between advanced and divine. So the system can be upgraded. When will that happen? I do not know, Master. Shin sighed. The system was powerful, but it lacked replication cards. He currently had 2 cards left, one common and one advanced. He couldn't use the advanced card carelessly. He planned to use the common card to copy either ocular power or physical abilities. As he chatted with the system, he drifted off to sleep. The next morning, after refining chakra for a while, he heard a knock on his door. Shin, why are you so lazy today? Kushina entered, and Shin stopped his chakra refining. Unlike martial arts training, chakra refining couldn't be disrupted. Kushina, why did you barge in like that? What if I wasn't dressed? Shin said, exasperated. So what, I've seen it all before. Kushina blushed slightly, then shrugged. She had indeed seen everything when they were younger. But that was then. Now, even though they weren't that old, they were practically adults by shinobi standards. I haven't been to your room in a while. Kushina pounced on Shin, tackling him to the tatami mat. Knock knock. What are you two doing? Mikoto stood at the door, knocking gently. Kushina jumped up, flustered, as if she had been caught doing something wrong. Then she realized she hadn't done anything wrong. If you don't come out for breakfast soon, it'll get cold, Mikoto said calmly. Shin didn't sense anything unusual in her tone, but Kushina felt a hint of danger. They went out for breakfast. Afterwards, Shin went to the small training ground in the courtyard. He continued to experiment with ice release. It had so much potential, as did every element, as long as the user could realize it. Developing jutsu wasn't easy. Only geniuses could do it, and the process was tedious. But Shin could handle the tedium. Taijutsu training was even more monotonous and tiring, yet he had persevered for years. Kushina and Mikoto were also training diligently. They wanted to be able to help Shin. During the Kirigakura incident, they had been helpless, forced to wait anxiously for Shin's return. They would rather face danger with him than worry about him. They were currently sparring. Mikoto, you're attacking so fiercely. Kushina dodged a sudden fireball jutsu and pouted. You're not holding back either. I won't go easy on you. I'm always serious in a fight. Mikoto smiled. She recalled the scene she had witnessed that morning, of Kushina pouncing on Shin, and her attacks intensified. Chapter 68, 68, The Nine Tails Jinkriki Transfer. Mikoto, you lost again. Kushina looked at the exhausted Mikoto. Kushina had won their spar. Mikoto was no match for her. Unless Mikoto awakened the Manjiki Sharingan, she would always be at a disadvantage against Kushina in Taijutsu. But Mikoto's Sharingan was only at the two-tomo stage. The Manjiki Sharingan was still a distant goal. I lost again. Mikoto sighed. She had never won against Kushina, even in a spar. It was frustrating. You're already very strong, Mikoto. Your strength is around Takubitsu Jainin level. In a year or two, you'll reach Jainin level. Shin comforted her. Jainin was a level many shinobi could never reach. Mikoto was already a genius. Of course, this was also due to her hard work and Shin's guidance. Talent alone wasn't enough. 2 months passed. During this time, Shin and his team didn't go on any missions. Shin focused on developing jutsu. Nothing major happened, though Hiruzen did try to introduce his niece to Shin again. Hiruzen hadn't given up. But when Shin saw the girl, he ran away. She looked like a gorilla. He couldn't handle it. Kushina and Mikoto chased her away before Shin could even say anything. Something feels off in the village today. Shin, Kushina, and Mikoto were strolling through the village. They needed a break from training. But as they walked through the streets, Shin noticed something was amiss. Many shinobi were hidden in the shadows. The entire village seemed to be on high alert. What's wrong? Kushina asked, confused. Can't you sense it? There are shinobi hidden everywhere. Something big is about to happen. Shin had a bad feeling. But what could be considered a big deal? A cage-level invasion? No one below Sunin level would dare invade Konoha. They'd be crushed. Konoha might not be at its peak, but it was still several times stronger than it would be at the start of the main storyline. It must be the Nine Tails. Shin's eyes narrowed. The only thing that could warrant such a high level of security was the strongest of the tailed beasts, the Kaibi. Perhaps the Jinkraki transfer ceremony was about to begin. Shin didn't tell Kushina and Mikoto. There was no point in them knowing. After a relaxing stroll through the village, they returned home in the evening. They had bought many high-quality ingredients. Mikoto had been experimenting with cooking lately. They were going to have a feast. In a hidden area behind the Hokage rock, Hiruzen stood with a solemn expression. He wasn't wearing his Hokage robes. He was dressed in battle attire. The Hokage robes were a symbol, not practical for combat. He didn't expect a fight, but it was better to be prepared. Besides Hiruzen, there were also Anbu and elite Jainin. Konoha's strongest forces were gathered here. Shin had guessed correctly. The Nine Tails transfer was about to take place. They were going to seal the Kyuubi into a Kiko. Mito-sama, are you sure we should do this now? You can still hold on for a while longer. Hiruzen said to Uzumaki Mito. Mito opened her eyes and shook her head. We have to complete the transfer while I can still suppress the Kyuubi. Otherwise, it will be a disaster. Hiruzen remained silent. He hadn't witnessed the Nine Tails' power himself, but he had heard stories. The Nine Tails was the strongest of the tailed beasts, its power surpassing that of the other 8 combined. If Hashirama Senju were still alive, they wouldn't need to be so cautious. To Hashirama, the Kyuubi was practically a pet. He had treated the tailed beasts as pets, while Madara Uchiha had seen them as beasts. To them, the tailed beasts were nothing special. But to other shinobi, the Nine Tails was a terrifying monster. Akiko, are you ready? Mito asked seriously. Akiko clenched her fists and nodded. She couldn't deny she was nervous. Akiko, the Kyuubi isn't inherently evil. I hope you can guide it to the right path, Mito said. I will, Mito-sama. Good. Let's begin. Mito didn't hesitate any longer. She formed hand seals and released the seal on her body. Crimson chakras seeped out, and a malevolent aura filled the air. Hiruzen's expression turned grim. Sealing team, prepare! He shouted. The Nine Tails chakra, even a small amount, was overwhelming. The 4-symbol seal was released, and the Kyuubi emerged, its massive form towering over the prepared Jainin. Roar! The Nine Tails roared, its voice and chakras shaking the entire village. Even Hiruzen felt suffocated. What a monster! Shin, eating dinner at home, sensed the Kyuubi's chakra and looked towards the mountain. What's that? Kushina and Mikoto asked, confused. The chakra was so immense that even they could sense it. Most shinobi in Konoha could. It seems my guess was right. It's none of our business. Let's eat. This cola chicken is delicious. Shin held up a chicken wing, unconcerned about the Nine Tails transfer. Kushina and Mikoto, although curious, continued eating. While they enjoyed their dinner, Hiruzen was panicking. The Kyuubi was more ferocious than he had imagined. The sealing team couldn't contain it. The Kyuubi lunged at the Konoha shinobi, its fangs bared. It hated them with a passion. It had been living a carefree life, then Hashirama had captured it and sealed it away. Its resentment was immense. Adamantine sealing chains. Several chakra chains erupted from Mito's back, binding the Kyuubi and restricting its movements. The Uzumaki clan had incredible life force. Ordinary Jinkraki died the moment the tailed beast was extracted, but Mito was different. Her life force could sustain her for a while longer. Chapter 69, 69, The Second Shinobi World War begins. The mountain-sized Nine-Tails was firmly bound by the adamantine sealing chains, unable to move. "Uzumaki Mito, I'll kill you!" the Kyuubi roared in fury. Sealed within Mito for decades, it naturally harbored immense hatred towards its container. Mito ignored the Kyuubi's threats, focusing all her energy on suppressing the beast. "Sealing team, now's your chance. Use the sealing jutsu!" Hiruzen yelled. They had to seize this opportunity. If the Kyuubi broke free, even Hiruzen wouldn't be able to stop it. Hiruzen was a cage-level shinobi at his peak, one of the strongest in the world, but he was no match for the Nine-Tails. He had mastered ordinary jutsu, but against a tailed beast, those jutsu were ineffective. Unless he used the dead demon-consuming seal, but that was a suicidal jutsu. Would he risk his life? Hurry! Don't let the Kyuubi use Bijdama tailed beast ball! Mito yelled to Hiruzen. She was losing control. Extracting a tailed beast drained the host's life force. And Mito was already nearing the end of her lifespan. She couldn't hold on much longer. If they didn't seal the Kyuubi now, while she was still alive, Konoha would face a catastrophe. The sealing team didn't disappoint. They worked together to seal the Kyuubi into a Kiko. 4-symbol seal. Mito, her life fading, used the last of her strength to apply the 4-symbol seal, leaving a mark resembling the Uzumaki clan symbol on Akiko's stomach. Akiko had fainted, but her steady breathing indicated she was fine. Mito closed her eyes. After applying the seal, she breathed her last. Hiruzen sighed, then ordered the Anbu to take Akiko back to the village and protect her. Now a Jinchuriki, Akiko could no longer leave the village for missions. Unless it was absolutely necessary, Hiruzen wouldn't allow her to leave. She was now Konoha's weapon. 3 days later, Konoha held a funeral for Mito. The entire village attended. Tsunade, who had been deployed to the border, returned for the funeral. "Tsunade's not taking this well, is she?" Shin watched Tsunade, who had been silent since returning from the funeral. He wanted to comfort her, but he didn't know what to say. He wasn't good at comforting people. "I knew this day would come. But it still hurts." Tsunade slumped over the table, her emotions a mix of grief and anger. The Nine-Tails transfer, such a major event involving her grandmother, and they hadn't even informed her. She didn't even get to say goodbye. Shin looked at Tsunade, unsure how to help. He shook his head and left the room, giving her some space. "Weren't you going to comfort her? Why are you back?" Kushina, who had been chatting with Mikoto, asked Shin. "I'm not good at that kind of thing," Shin said with a helpless shrug. 2 days passed. Tsunade was no longer consumed by grief. News of Mito's death had spread throughout the shinobi world. "Are you sure Uzumaki Mito is dead?" the third Kazekage asked the reporting shinobi. "Yes, Kazekage-sama. They held a funeral for her a few days ago." Konoha wouldn't joke about something like this. "Cho, what do you think?" The Kazekage turned to the woman standing beside him. This was Cho, Suna's advisor, around the same age as Hiruzen. "Suna has been preparing for so long. We haven't attacked because the timing wasn't right. I believe now is the perfect opportunity to strike." Konoha, Cho said seriously. Suna had been facing off against Konoha at the border for months, waiting for the right moment. And now, the opportunity had arrived. A few days ago, they had finally convinced the third Tsuchikage, Noki, to join them in attacking Konoha. And with Mito's death, Konoha's strength had been significantly weakened. Mito was the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki. This wasn't a secret. Now that she was dead, and with the new Jinchuriki still adjusting, the Nine Tails was effectively out of commission. It was like their nuclear weapon had been temporarily deactivated. This was their chance. By the way, have we reached an agreement with Omegakure? Cho asked. No. Hans refuses to cooperate. He wants to forbid us from entering the land of rain. The Kazekage was furious. Hans might be strong, but that didn't give him the right to disrespect Suna. If Hans refuses to cooperate, then we'll ignore him. I don't believe that little Omegakure would dare oppose Suna. Chiyo's eyes flashed with determination. She wasn't the frail old woman she would become in the future. Then I'll leave this to you, Cho. The Kazekage said. He wouldn't be leading the forces from the front lines. As a Kage, he wouldn't participate in battle unless it was absolutely necessary. Cho nodded. After the Kazekage returned to the village, she and her brother, Ebizo, led the Suna forces across the border into the land of rain. They had already agreed with Noki to attack the land of fire from the land of rain. The land of rain would become the battleground for the three great nations. As for Omegakure's opinion, they had no say in the matter. The weak were always at the mercy of the strong. After months of stalemate, the Second Shinobi World War finally began, initiated by Suna. Cho sent a team of elite Jainin to launch a surprise attack on the Konoha forces stationed at the border. Caught off guard, Konoha suffered heavy losses. Then the main Suna force arrived, led by Cho herself. Konoha was forced to retreat. After months of stalemate, the Konoha shinobi had grown complacent. That was why they were so easily defeated in the surprise attack. Suna occupied Konoha's former base and seized a large amount of supplies. They had gained a significant advantage. Chapter 70, You might hate it, but I like it. Hiruzen slammed his fist on the desk in fury. The news of the Suna attack had reached Konoha. The bastards! Mito's funeral had just ended, and they were already making their move. The Suna attack had resulted in over 100 Konoha shinobi dead and 300 injured. Many of the injured were poisoned. If they didn't receive treatment soon, the death toll would rise sharply. 300 was a significant number. A small hidden village might not even have that many shinobi. Inform Tsunade. Tell her to head to the front lines. Hiruzen ordered an Anbu agent. According to the reports, Chiyo's poison was potent. The medics on the front lines could only slow its effects, not cure it. Tsunade was Konoha's best medic. She was the only one who could handle this. Yes, Hokage-sama. An Anbu agent hidden in the shadows vanished to relay the message. Knock knock knock. Come in. A white-haired Anbu with a sword strapped to his back entered and bowed. Sakumo, you are relieved of your duties as Anbu commander. I have a more important mission for you, Hiruzen said gravely. Sakumo Hatake was Kakashi's father. Besides Hiruzen, he was the strongest in Konoha. He wasn't much older than Hiruzen's three disciples, but he was far stronger, already at Kage level. A true genius. Your orders, Hokage-sama. Sakumo had no objections to being removed from his position. He would obey the Hokage's commands. I'm sending you to the battlefield to replace Orochimaru as the commander. Hiruzen said. Orochimaru was currently the commander, but he was still too young and inexperienced for such a responsibility. Sakumo nodded, accepting the mission without hesitation. The Second Shinobi World War has begun, Shin asked Tsunade after seeing off the Anbu messenger. It's not a world war yet. Just a conflict between Konoha and Suna, Tsunade corrected him. Shin scoffed. Tsunade, do you really think Suna would dare attack Konoha alone? If Suna had the guts to attack Konoha alone, they wouldn't have waited this long. Maintaining a stalemate at the border for months wasn't cheap. Suna wouldn't have done that if they weren't afraid of Konoha. Now that they were attacking, besides the Nine Tails Jinchuriki being out of commission, they must have another reason: allies. Konoha was undeniably powerful. Shin didn't believe Suna would attack without backup. What do you mean? Tsunade frowned. Suna must have found allies. Otherwise, why would they attack Konoha alone? Tsunade shook her head. Konoha might have suffered a setback, but that was only because Suna had caught them off guard. Suna was weaker than Konoha. They knew that. If they were attacking, they must have help. Her expression turned grim. Are you going to tell the Sandame? Shin asked. Tsunade nodded. She had to warn him. There's no need. If even I can figure this out, don't you think the Sandame already knows? I'm just saying this war won't be easy. Be careful. So you're worried about me? Tsunade looked at Shin and suddenly pinched his cheek. I haven't done this in a while. Feels good. A smile finally appeared on her face. She hadn't smiled since Mito's death. I hate it. Shin swatted her hand away. He wasn't a child, he didn't like being pinched. If it were someone he wasn't familiar with, he would have trapped them in a genjutsu world. You might hate it, but I like it. Tsunade reached for his cheek again, but this time, two small hands intercepted her. Tsunade-sensei, it's rude to make others uncomfortable, Mikoto said. Humph, why are you touching him? Kushina glared at Tsunade. What's wrong with me touching him? He's my student. I can show him affection. Besides, you're both my students. What right do you have to lecture your teacher? Tsunade pulled Shin into a hug, burying his face in her ample bosom. Shin felt a wave of warmth and a slight lack of oxygen. He could resist, but he wasn't stupid. This was a golden opportunity, he wouldn't waste it. Tsunade looked at Kushina triumphantly. She was deliberately provoking her. And she succeeded. Mikoto, help me pry this cow off him. Kushina yelled through gritted teeth. Sorry, Tsunade-sensei, but this is inappropriate. You can't just do that to a boy. Mikoto sided with Kushina without hesitation. They tried to pull Tsunade away, but they were no match for her strength. In the end, Shin had to push her away himself. He would have loved to stay in her embrace, but he needed to breathe. I'm leaving. You three stay in the village. Don't go anywhere. Tsunade said, then left for the battlefield. They didn't know when she would return. After she left, Kushina and Mikoto glared at Shin. Why didn't you resist when Tsunade was taking advantage of you? Kushina demanded. Shin was confused. Wasn't he the one taking advantage of him? I couldn't resist her strength. Believe me. Shin said weakly. Kushina and Mikoto rolled their eyes. They didn't believe him for a second. He had probably enjoyed it. Chapter 71, 71, Conan the Angel. Half a year passed in a flash. The war had been raging for 6 months. Konoha, Suna, Iwa, and Omegakure were locked in a bloody conflict. Even Konoha's genin were being deployed to the battlefield. Shin and his team were also on the front lines. If even genin were being sent, chunin like them were indispensable. War is so cruel. These people are so unfortunate. Mikoto looked at the gaunt and fearful civilians of the Land of Rain with pity. The Land of Rain was already impoverished due to its harsh climate. Now, ravaged by war, it was filled with refugees. Even as refugees, they had to hide, afraid of encountering shinobi. To them, ninja were no different from demons. Everyone knows war is cruel, but the rewards are too tempting, Shin said softly. Without conflicts of interest, there would be no war. What are you guys sighing about? Aren't you hungry? Kushina complained. I'm starving. We have rations. Kushina took out the rations and glared at Shin. You eat one and show me. Ahem, I'm not hungry. Shin looked away. The rations were rock hard. This is what they gave us. How are we supposed to eat this? Use it to sharpen our teeth, Kushina grumbled. Konoha seemed to be low on funds. They had to make do with these for now. If they wanted decent food, they'd have to wait for the Land of Fire's daimyo to provide more funding. Let's go find something to eat. If they wanted good food, they had to hunt for it themselves. They entered the forest, the drizzle soaking their clothes. Shin wasn't sure if there were any animals left in this forest. They weren't the only ones hunting. This damned weather. It rains 9 days out of 10, and the one day it doesn't, it's cloudy. Shin looked up at the overcast sky. He had been on the battlefield for half a month and hadn't seen the sun once. After searching for a while, they finally found a rabbit. A scrawny one, but it was better than nothing. Mikoto roasted the rabbit, ending its miserable life. Smells good. Kushina's eyes sparkled. Kushina, you're drooling, Shin teased. Kushina quickly wiped her mouth, then realized there was no drool. You tricked me. She glared at Shin. Shin shrugged. It was her fault for being so gullible. Roar. A roar echoed through the forest. Shin's eyes lit up. It sounded like a bear. I'll go check it out. Maybe we can have bear for dinner. Shin informed Kushina and Mikoto, then vanished in a flash. Hey, I want to come too. Kushina jumped up. Kushina, stay here, Mikoto said, gently pushing her back down. Shin followed the sound of the roar and found the bear. It was charging towards a small, dirty girl. The girl stood frozen in fear, her eyes wide with terror. The bear wasn't that big, but it was more than capable of killing a child. Lucky for you, I happened to be passing by. Shin threw an ice blue kunai. It embedded itself in the bear's head, and the bear collapsed. Shin appeared next to the bear. It wasn't small, but it was thin, almost malnourished. Most of the edible resources in this forest had been hunted by shinobi. This bear probably hadn't eaten a decent meal in a while. Are you all right? Shin turned to the girl, who was still cowering with her eyes closed. She was covered in dirt, but her light blue hair was beautiful. I am fine. She opened her eyes, looking at Shin with a mixture of gratitude and fear. She was grateful he had saved her, but she was also afraid of him. He was a shinobi. Shinobi were feared and hated in the land of rain. Don't worry, I'm not going to kill a child, Shin reassured her. He ignored her and picked up the bear carcass, preparing to leave. Wait. The girl called out weakly. Here. This is for you. Thank you for saving me. She offered Shin a mushroom she had been holding. Shin smiled. What's your name? Conan. She spoke softly, her head lowered. She was both grateful and terrified of Shin. You're Conan. Shin's mind flashed to Conan, the angel of the Akatsuki. He looked at her light blue hair, then stepped closer and wiped the dirt from her face. Her young features seemed vaguely familiar. It really was Conan of the Akatsuki. She hadn't met Yahiko and Nagato yet, or she wouldn't be alone. Conan looked at Shin, her eyes filled with fear. Come with me. Shin picked her up with one arm and the bear with the other, then vanished in a flash. The heavy bear didn't slow him down at all. You're finally back. We were about to come looking for you. Who's this little girl? Kushina looked at Konan curiously. I found her. She looked pitiful, so I brought her back, Shin said. Of course, Konan's identity was also a factor. He was quite fond of Konan, the angel of the Akatsuki. She does look pitiful. And cute. Kushina examined Konan, then looked at Shin suspiciously. Had he brought her back because she was cute, why else would he be so compassionate? Chapter 72, 72, the third Kazekage arrives on the battlefield. Shin enjoyed his roasted rabbit, ignoring the curious stares from Kushina and Mikoto. He cleared his throat. Kushina, Mikoto, is something wrong with the rabbit? Why are you staring at me like that? We're just curious, Mikoto said. They were both puzzled by Shin bringing Konan back. They didn't believe he had done it out of pure compassion. What's there to be curious about? Finish eating, and let's head back to camp to report, Shin said. They were on a mission to scout for enemy shinobi in the area. Konan, here's a rabbit leg for you. Shin offered Konan a leg. Konan looked at him timidly, then at the rabbit leg with longing, but she didn't dare take it. Go on, eat. Don't be afraid, Mikoto said gently. Yeah, we won't hurt you, Kushina added. Unable to resist the temptation, Konan finally took the rabbit leg and nibbled on it. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. She had managed to find some mushrooms, but then she encountered the bear and almost died. A single rabbit wasn't enough, so they roasted the mushrooms Konan had found and a bear paw as well. Bear paw is so good. What about the rest? Kushina looked at the bear carcass. There were 3 more paws, and they hadn't even touched the meat. We can't waste it. Shin sealed the carcass in a scroll. Konan, are you coming with us, or are you going to continue wandering around? Shin asked Konan. Come with us. It's dangerous for a little girl to be alone, Kushina said. The entire land of rain is dangerous right now. You should stay with us, Mikoto added. You really want me to come with you? Konan asked timidly. She was young, but the war had forced her to mature quickly. She knew she was a burden. It's your choice, Konan. If you want to come with us, you can. If you want to leave, we won't stop you, Shin said. He wouldn't force her either way. I want to go with you, Konan said, looking at Shin. All right, let's go then. Shin smiled and led Konan out of the forest. They arrived at a small town. Due to the war, it was practically deserted. They bought Konan some new clothes at a clothing store, then found an inn and had Mikoto help Konan wash up and change. She was covered in mud from being chased by the bear. They then headed back to the Konoha camp. No one questioned them about the little girl, they were Tsunade's students, after all. This was the battlefield between Konoha and Suna. Orochimaru was the commander, with Tsunade and Jiraiya as his deputies. No one would question them. As for the original commander, Sakumo Hatake, he had been transferred to the IWA front. They went to find Tsunade. She was surprised to see Konan. Who's this little girl? Tsunade asked Shin. Her name is Konan. I saved her in the forest and brought her back. She can stay with you for now. Shin and his team often went on missions. It was better for Konan to stay with Tsunade, who was responsible for treating the injured and developing antidotes for Chiyo's poison. Tsunade rarely participated in direct combat. Tsunade frowned. Wasn't it dangerous to bring a stranger into the camp? She could be a spy. Don't worry, Shin said, sensing her concern. Tsunade trusted Shin. She nodded and said to Konan, "You can stay with me for now." Konan took a step back and looked at Shin, clinging to his clothes. She was anxious in this unfamiliar environment. Only Shin, her savior, could give her a sense of security. "Don't worry, Konan. If I'm in camp, you can stay with me. But if I'm on a mission, you'll have to stay with Tsunade. It's too dangerous to take you with me." Shin pinched Konan's cheek. It was so soft, he couldn't resist pinching it again. Konan blushed and nodded. "Tsunade, we have a problem." Jiraiya and Orochimaru suddenly arrived. Their presence meant trouble. Jiraiya looked at Konan curiously. "Didn't you say there was a problem? Tell us what it is." Yet, business first." Jiraiya turned serious. He wasn't interested in some random little girl. "I'll explain. The third Kazekage is here," Orochimaru said. It was better than letting Jiraiya waste time with his rambling. What? Tsunade's eyes widened in alarm. The third Kazekage's presence meant he was participating in the war. The third Kazekage was considered the strongest Kazekage. Even Hiruzen might not be able to defeat him. Tsunade was overestimating him, though. The strongest Kazekage wasn't the third. After all, he had been killed and turned into a puppet by Sasori. Regardless of whether Sasori used tricks or schemes, it didn't change the fact that the so-called strongest Kazekage had been defeated. But to Orochimaru and the others, the third Kazekage was still a formidable opponent. "Do you have a plan?" Tsunade asked Jiraiya and Orochimaru. "Orochimaru has already sent someone back to Konoha to inform the Hokage." "We have to stall for time," Jiraiya said. Tsunade nodded. That was their only option. They had to wait for Hiruzen's instructions. Chapter 73, Shin joins the battle. The result of Orochimaru and Jiraiya's discussion was that if the third Kazekage joined the battle, the three of them would team up to hold him back. On a battlefield with thousands of shinobi, a cage-level fighter might seem insignificant, but their impact was still immense. They could create a breakthrough, potentially leading to a complete rout. Tsunade was worried. Even though Konoha was strong, facing two other hidden villages and a Megakure was a challenge. With the third Kazekage joining the fray, Konoha might be defeated. Konoha's strongest period was probably during the Third Shinobi World War, with the Sunin, the Yellow Flash Minato Namikaze, Hiruzen Sarutobi, and Dan's Shimura. But now, during the Second War, the Sunin were still developing, they hadn't earned their title yet. "Why the long face? It's just the third Kazekage," Shin said to Tsunade, who glared at him in response. Just the third Kazekage? How could he underestimate him so much? He was known as the strongest Kazekage in history. A good reputation wasn't easily earned. Tsunade rolled her eyes at Shin. "You three stay in camp for the next few days," she ordered. This was for their protection. "Want me to take out the third Kazekage?" Shin offered. "No." Tsunade refused without hesitation. She knew Shin was strong, but she didn't think he was stronger than a kage. And the third Kazekage wasn't just any kage, he was the strongest Kazekage, with the Kekii Genkai. "I knew you'd say that." Shin shook his head and returned to their tent with Kushina, Mikoto, and Konan. He had been staying in camp for the past few days, training and teaching Konan the chakra refinement technique. He hadn't been on any missions, but he was well informed. He knew Konoha had suffered several defeats. Even with Orochimaru, Jiraiya, and Tsunade working together, they couldn't turn the tide. It wasn't that they couldn't defeat the third Kazekage. They could handle him together. But Suna had other powerful shinobi, like Cho and her brother, Ebizo, both cage level. Against them, the Sunin were at a disadvantage. Tsunade, are you injured? Shin noticed blood on Tsunade's arm. Tsunade-sensei is hurt. Mikoto rushed over to examine the wound. There was a deep gash on Tsunade's right arm. It's nothing. Just a scratch from that old hag Chiyo's puppet. Tsunade's eyes flashed with anger. She wouldn't have been injured if Cho hadn't used her puppets to attack while Tsunade was busy fending off the third Kazekage. Shin examined the wound. It was deep, but not life-threatening. It hadn't reached the bone. With Tsunade's healing abilities and medical ninjutsu, she would recover in a few days. Shin channeled green chakra into his hand and placed it on Tsunade's arm. Tsunade was surprised. You learned the mystical palm jutsu. The mystical palm jutsu was an advanced medical ninjutsu. Tsunade had taught it to him just a few days ago. She hadn't expected him to master it so quickly. You know, I have thousands of shadow clones helping me train. It only took a few days. With thousands of clones practicing the mystical palm jutsu, an hour was equivalent to months of training for others. But shadow clones could only assist with ninjutsu training. Chakra refining, taijutsu, and kenjutsu still required him to train personally. How are Orochimaru and Jiraiya? Shin asked. Tsunade had recovered from her shock. Shin had surprised her so many times that she was becoming immune to it. Orochimaru has some minor injuries. Jiraiya is worse, he won't be able to fight for at least half a month, Tsunade sighed. What's the plan? Shin asked. Orochimaru wants to avoid further conflict and wait for reinforcements. It's been a few days, they should arrive soon. Shin shook his head. I don't think reinforcements are coming. If the third Kazekage is involved, he won't let us send for help so easily. The messenger was probably intercepted. It was just a guess, but Shin was almost certain. Suna wouldn't allow Konoha to call for reinforcements. Avoiding conflict isn't that easy. I'm going to the battlefield tomorrow, Shin said. What? Why? Tsunade was alarmed. I've been on the front lines for so long, and I haven't even seen the battlefield. That's pathetic. Shin grinned. This is not a joke, Shin. The battlefield is dangerous. Tsunade scolded him. I know you're worried about me, but I can protect myself. Besides, I want to see how strong I am now. And seeing you injured, it makes me want to avenge you and teach that old hag Cho some manners. Shin finally persuaded Tsunade. Or rather, she realized she couldn't stop him. Even if she disagreed, Shin would still go. The next day, on the battlefield, Orochimaru noticed Shin. Shin-kun, what are you doing here? Orochimaru-sama, the third Kazekage isn't that much older than you, is he? I'm disappointed you can't defeat him. Shin looked at Orochimaru's injuries. They were minor, but he still looked a bit battered. Orochimaru frowned. Shin-kun, you're not here to help us defend against Suna, are you? Yeah, if we lose, we're all doomed. I have to think about my own safety. Shin watched the approaching Suna forces, his eyes turned serious. It was clear that Suna wanted to crush Konoha before reinforcements arrived. If Konoha received reinforcements, and Hiruzen joined the battle, Suna wouldn't stand a chance. So, Shin-kun, how do you plan to help? Do you have a way to repel them? Orochimaru looked at Shin. He didn't believe Shin could turn the tide, but he was curious. Orochimaru's senses were sharp. He could sense danger emanating from Shin. Chapter 74, 1 against 1,000. The third Kazekage led the Suna forces in a fierce charge. Orochimaru had erected a tall earth wall as a barrier, but he didn't expect it to hold for long. It was merely a delaying tactic. Retreating was the wisest course of action, but they had to choose the right moment. Otherwise, they'd be hunted down by Suna, and perhaps even Omegakure would join in for a share of the spoils. I hear the third Kazekage boasts absolute defense. Shin's eyes were fixed on the third Kazekage, who looked deceptively young. He was a genius, possessing the magnet release Kekii Genkai. It was likely a Kekii Genkai he had developed himself. The fourth Kazekage, Raza, had learned magnet release from him. I don't know about absolute defense, but his defense is certainly strong. Even Tsunade couldn't break through his iron sand, Orochimaru said. He looked at Shin. Shin-kun, do you have a way to break through his defenses? If even Tsunade can't do it, what makes you think I can? I'm just a Chunin. Oh, are you really only Chunin? Shin-kun. Orochimaru gave him a knowing look. Who knows? Shin watched the approaching Suna forces, drew his Kusanagi sword, and leaped over the earth wall. Orochimaru frowned. Orochimaru-sama, he went down there. Should we bring him back? Ajanin asked Orochimaru. Observe. Perhaps he'll surprise us. I'm quite curious. Orochimaru waved a hand dismissively, his snake-like eyes gleaming with anticipation. You'll be my whetstone. Shin's eyes also held a glint of excitement. He didn't know exactly how strong he was, but the battlefield was the perfect testing ground. He wasn't afraid of danger. His Mangeki Sharingan abilities could protect him. With Yamatsu Hirasaka, he could escape any situation. Wielding his Kusanagi sword, Shin charged towards the Suna forces, a blur of motion against the backdrop of the battlefield. He's fast. Orochimaru's eyes widened. Even he would struggle to dodge at that speed. Clang! Shin's sword clashed against the third Kazekage's iron sand, sending the Kazekage flying. If the Kazekage hadn't sensed the danger and used his magnet release to defend at the last moment, he would be dead. What? The Suna shinobi stared in disbelief at the young boy who had just sent their Kazekage flying with a single blow. They couldn't believe their eyes. This kid, who looked no older than 12, had repelled their Kazekage at the Konoha camp. Tsunade clenched her fists. Damn it, he's reckless. Orochimaru, why did you let him go? Why didn't you stop him? She glared at Orochimaru. She had been treating some injured shinobi and had arrived late. She hadn't expected Shin to charge into the enemy ranks alone. Tsunade, do you want to go down there too? Orochimaru asked, seeing her agitation. You're still injured. Even if you go, you won't be much help. If he dared to face them, he must have a plan. You'd just be a burden. Tsunade hesitated. He was right. She would be a liability in her current state. Shin had space-time ninjutsu, he should be fine. She'd give him a good scolding when he got back. Are you all stunned? Shin looked at the Suna shinobi, who were frozen in shock. He swung his sword, cutting down several of them. Their death snapped the others out of their daze. They glared at Shin with fury. Shin charged into the enemy ranks. They wouldn't dare use large-scale ninjutsu now. That was how the Third Raikage had been able to fight 1,000 shinobi for 3 days and 3 nights. They didn't use powerful jutsu for fear of harming their own comrades. With their own allies mixed in with the enemies, how could they use ninjutsu? Shin reveled in the chaos. In terms of taijutsu, perhaps only the Third Raikage could match him. And in kenjutsu, he believed he was unmatched in the shinobi world. Flash slash! He combined the body flicker jutsu with his swordsmanship, killing over a dozen Suna shinobi in an instant, including a Jainin. Weak. Shin flicked the blood off his Kusanagi sword. He had already killed dozens. His sword danced through the enemy ranks like a reaper's scythe. He kicked a shinobi who tried to attack him from behind. The man flew through the air and landed with a sickening thud, his body twisted at an unnatural angle. Wind style, Rasen Shuriken. The giant shuriken, formed from swirling wind chakra, shot towards the Suna forces. It exploded, the countless tiny needles tearing through flesh and bone. Shin had aimed for the densest part of the enemy formation. The shinobi there were helpless against the Rasen Shuriken. Move! Scatter! The third Kazekage yelled. He had a gash on his chest, courtesy of Shin's sword. Even with his iron sand defense, he had still been injured. The Kusanagi sword was incredibly sharp, and Shin's strength was monstrous. Thankfully, the Kazekage's defense was strong, or he would have been gutted. I'm almost tempted to copy his magnet release, Shin mused, seeing the Kazekage's relatively minor injury. But he didn't. He had learned that Uchiha had awakened the Mangeki Sharingan. He was saving his last advanced replication card for that. His own Mangeki Sharingan had reached its limit, but it still hadn't evolved into the eternal Mangeki Sharingan. He wanted to copy another Mangeki Sharingan to help his own evolve. Compared to the eternal Mangeki Sharingan, magnet release was nothing. The choice was obvious. The third Kazekage ordered his men to retreat, then faced Shin alone. He wasn't trying to be a hero, he simply didn't want his men to get caught in the crossfire. He glared at Shin with murderous intent. If he hadn't reacted quickly, he would have been killed by Shin's sword. Chapter 75, Ice Release, Ice Age. Shin and the third Kazekage faced each other. The other Suna shinobi formed a circle around them. Kazekage-sama, do you need assistance? Cho asked. No. The Kazekage refused. He wasn't going to gang up on a kid. Cho frowned. They couldn't underestimate this boy. He had injured the Kazekage with a single blow. She felt the Kazekage was being arrogant. This could end badly. Vacuum slash. Shin swung his sword with full force, slicing through the air. A blade of compressed air shot towards the Kazekage. Creating an air blade with a sword was far more difficult than with a punch. The air blade was incredibly fast. The Kazekage's eyes widened. Magnet release, Iron Sand World Method. Iron sand swirled around the Kazekage, forming an impenetrable sphere. The air blade struck the iron sand, sparks flying. It slowly cut through the iron sand, but the defense was thick, over 30 centimeters. The air blade managed to penetrate 20 centimeters before dissipating. Couldn't break it. Disappointing. Shin sheathed his sword. But since you like staying in there so much, why don't you stay there forever? Ice release, Ice Age. Shin's hands flew through a series of hand seals, 15 seals in 2 seconds. An icy chill emanated from him. Ignoring the chakra cost, frost spread from his feet, covering the ground in a thick layer of ice. The iron sand sphere encasing the Kazekage was instantly frozen. The ice continued to spread outwards. Retreat! Everyone, retreat! Cho yelled, leading the Suna forces in a hasty retreat. Those further away were fine, but the shinobi near the front couldn't escape. The stronger ones managed to flee, but the Chunin were too slow. They were frozen solid, encased in ice. Within moments, a 1-kilometer radius was transformed into a world of ice. Hundreds of ice pillars stood frozen in this icy wasteland. They were the Suna shinobi who hadn't been able to escape. Still not as powerful as Kyuzen's Hi no Mi. Shin observed his Ice Age jutsu. He had developed it based on Kyuzen's Devil Fruit ability, but it was still far weaker. Kyuzen could freeze dozens of kilometers of ocean with ease. But Shin's ice release was still developing. Perhaps one day, he would surpass Kyuzen. Shin wasn't completely satisfied, but the Suna and Konoha shinobi were stunned. That's ice release. When did he get ice release? He didn't tell me. Tsunade was indignant. What incredible power! Orochimaru's eyes widened in shock. Damn that brat! Cho almost fainted, seeing her frozen comrades. Quick! Save the Kazekage! Ebizo, Chiyo's brother, yelled, his eyes filled with worry. The third Kazekage was trapped in the ice. If they didn't rescue him soon, he would suffocate. They had to break the ice. If the Kazekage died here, Suna would be in danger. Ebizo charged forward, using wind release to attack the ice encasing the Kazekage. But the ice was as hard as steel. Shin watched them calmly. They wouldn't be able to break it. He wondered if the Kazekage could escape from the inside. The Kazekage had deactivated his iron sand defense. He looked at the ice surrounding him, his face pale. He manipulated the iron sand, forming various weapons, and attacked the ice from the inside. With attacks from both inside and outside, and with some shinobi using fire release, the ice finally shattered. The Kazekage emerged, gasping for air. The space within the sphere hadn't been large, the air had been thin. Retreat! The Kazekage ordered. He didn't try to attack Shin. He chose to retreat. The Suna shinobi wanted to save their frozen comrades, but they knew the chances of survival were slim. You think you can just retreat, did you ask me? Shin charged towards them, his sword flashing. A massive air blade sliced through the ice. Puppet technique, human puppet. Cho used the human puppet jutsu to defend, and the third Kazekage used his strongest iron sand defense. The other Suna shinobi also used defensive jutsu. The sight was spectacular, even more so than when Shin had faced the combined might of Kirigakuer. The air blade sliced through 10 puppets and broke through the Kazekage's iron sand defense. The air blade was too large, and the Kazekage's iron sand wall wasn't thick enough. But after breaking through the iron sand, the air blade's power was spent. It was easily blocked by the other Suna shinobi's defenses. The Suna forces retreated hastily, abandoning their frozen comrades. The chances of survival for those trapped in the ice were slim. The Kazekage wouldn't risk further losses to save them. If Shin used another Ice Age jutsu, the consequences would be dire. Cho winced as she retrieved the broken human puppet. It was a masterpiece by the previous generation's puppet master, Monzaemon Chikamatsu. It was irreplaceable, and now it was damaged. She didn't know if she could repair it. As she collected the puppet, she suddenly felt a chill, a sense of danger. She instinctively leaned to the side. A flash of white, and a sword pierced through her body. She had dodged slightly, avoiding a fatal blow. The sword, aimed for her heart, had missed, piercing her side instead. Too bad. Shin deactivated his Manjiki Sharingan, disappointed. He had almost killed Cho. He had used Yamatsu Hirasaka to open a small, invisible portal and thrust his Kusanagi sword through it. The sword had emerged from another portal near Cho, stabbing her from a distance of several hundred meters. This was another application of Yamatsu Hirasaka. Chapter 76, 76, Just warming up. Shin returned to the Konoha camp, greeted by awestruck stares. Before, he was just Tsunade's student. Now, he was a hero, a powerhouse who had single-handedly forced a retreat from 3,000 Suna shinobi. In their eyes, he was comparable to the Sandome Hokage. If Shin knew what they were thinking, he would laugh. If Hiruzen faced the third Kazekage and the Suna forces, he'd be dead in an instant. Among the current 5 Kage, the ones Shin looked down on the most were the third Hokage and the third Mizu Kage. Not in terms of strength, but in terms of value. The third Kazekage had magnet release, which Shin wanted to copy. If he hadn't been saving his advanced replication card for the Manjiki Sharingan, he would have copied it already. The third Raikage had lightning release chakra mode, a powerful jutsu passed down through generations of Raikage. And the third Tsuchikage had dust release, a Keki Ayata that could disintegrate anything into atoms. The third Hokage and third Mizu Kage, however, had nothing that interested Shin. Hiruzen's mastery of ordinary jutsu was impressive, but he didn't have a Keki-I Genkai. He wasn't worth copying. Tsunade approached Shin with a frown and grabbed his ear. "You're quite capable, aren't you? Facing 3,000 Suna shinobi alone, do you have a death wish?" she scolded. "Ahem, have some respect. There are people watching." Shin removed her hand. "I wasn't in any danger." "No danger? Do you know how powerful a coordinated ninjutsu assault from that many shinobi can be?" Shin knew. He had seen it during the Fourth Shinobi World War. But he had Yamatsu Hirasaka. He wasn't afraid of any combination jutsu. And he had charged into their ranks. They wouldn't dare use any large-scale jutsu for fear of friendly fire. "Shin-kun, I didn't expect you to be this strong." Orochimaru approached, his eyes filled with caution. He knew Shin was stronger than him. "That was ice release, wasn't it? I didn't know it could be so powerful." Orochimaru was intrigued by the ice release. He was always interested in powerful abilities. "It's nothing special," Shin said modestly, though his tone was a bit smug. He couldn't help it. "When did you learn ice release?" Tsunade asked. She was still angry that he hadn't told her. "Did he see her as an outsider about 6 months ago? Shortly after you left for the border. You knew for so long, and you didn't tell me." Tsunade glared at him. Shin shivered. He had never seen her this angry before. "I'll be going now." Shin made a quick escape. Kushina and Mikoto were probably worried. He had to find them. "Kushina, Shin's back." Mikoto nudged Kushina, who had been lost in thought, snapping her out of her daze. "He's back." Kushina looked up and saw Shin. She rushed towards him and leaped into his arms. "Sorry for making you worry," Shin said, hugging her back. Mikoto and Konan also approached. Konan relaxed, relieved to see Shin's safe return. Mikoto checked him for injuries. Shin accepted her concern with a smile. Seeing that he was unharmed, Mikoto sighed in relief. "You must be hungry. I'll make you something to eat." She went to prepare some meat from the bear Shin had brought back. "I'm not that hungry. I didn't use much energy. Just a warm-up." Shin grinned. Tsunade, who had followed them, overheard his comment and rolled her eyes. A warm-up. His warm-up had resulted in hundreds of Suna shinobi dead. "Don't brag. You must have used a lot of chakra, right?" Tsunade asked. That ice release jutsu had frozen an entire kilometer, the chakra cost must have been immense. "Chakra consumption." Shin shook his head. "That was nothing to me. Have you forgotten how much chakra I have?" Tsunade recalled his monstrous chakra reserves, rivaling those of a tailed beast. "Right. I guess that wasn't much for you." She had thought her own chakra reserves were impressive, but Shin had put her to shame. She had the sage body, but hers was a weaker version. Shin's perfect sage body was the real deal. Chapter 77, 77, Dan's arrives as reinforcement. 3 days later, Konoha's reinforcements finally arrived. Hiruzen had sent Dan's Shimura, leading 1,000 Konoha shinobi. Perhaps intimidated by Shin's display of power, Suna hadn't launched any further attacks in the past 3 days. But they hadn't retreated either. With Dan's arrival, command of the Konoha forces naturally fell to him. Dan's immediately gathered the shinobi for a meeting, eager to announce his new position as commander. The man craved power. Orochimaru, you managed to hold back the third Kazekage. You're quite capable. Dan said to Orochimaru, his tone laced with disdain. It was all thanks to Shin-kun. I had nothing to do with it. If it weren't for him, Suna would have already invaded the land of fire. Orochimaru glanced at Dan's. Shin-kun. Dan's frowned. Uzumaki Shin. Surely you know him, Dan-sama. Orochimaru looked at Dan's pointedly. Uzumaki Shin. Dan's face contorted in anger. He had lost 4 elite genin and several other shinobi trying to capture that brat. He had been so furious that he couldn't eat for days. Orochimaru noticed his reaction. It seemed Dan's had a grudge against Shin. He wasn't surprised. Dan's was the type to make enemies easily. And judging from his expression, he had probably been on the losing end of their encounter. What does he have to do with this? Dan's pushed down his anger and asked Orochimaru. Uzumaki Shin was barely 10 years old. Dan's couldn't imagine a child playing a significant role on the battlefield. Shin-kun single-handedly repelled the third Kazekage and forced the retreat of 3,000 Suna shinobi. Otherwise, we would have been forced to retreat, and Suna would have invaded the land of fire. Orochimaru explained, watching Dan's reaction with amusement. Are you serious? Dan's shot to his feet. He couldn't believe it. Repelling the Kazekage and 3,000 Suna shinobi, even Hashirama Senju couldn't have done that at that age. He suspected Orochimaru was lying. Why would I lie, Dan-sama? You can ask anyone here. Dan's expression flickered. He finally understood why the shinobi he had sent to capture Shin had never returned. It wasn't Hiruzen who had interfered. It was that brat Uzumaki Shin who had killed them all. After a moment of silence, Dan's changed the subject. Where are Tsunade and Jiraiya? Most of the genin and elite genin were present, but Tsunade and Jiraiya were missing. Dan-sama, Jiraiya-sama is severely injured and recovering. Tsunade-sama is busy treating the wounded, an elite genin explained. Humph! Dan snorted. He didn't care about Jiraiya's injuries, but he suspected Tsunade was deliberately avoiding him. He knew Tsunade disliked him. He then discussed strategies against Suna with the others. Finally, he said, summon Uzumaki Shin. Orochimaru looked at Dan's, curious about his intentions. At Shin's tent, a Chunin arrived. Shin-sama, Dan-sama requests your presence. Shin emerged from the tent and looked at the Chunin. Dan's wants to see me. Yes, Shin-sama. I'm here to deliver the message. The Chunin was respectful. Shin might be young, but his strength had earned him respect. All the shinobi in the camp treated him with deference. I understand. You're dismissed. Shin sent the Chunin away and entered the tent. Just as I expected, Dan's wants to see me. He said to Tsunade, who was sitting inside. She wasn't busy treating the wounded, the medics could handle that. It was just an excuse to avoid Dan's. Dan's summons are never a good thing, Tsunade said. Yeah, don't go, Kushina agreed. Good or bad, I'm not afraid of him. I'll go see what he wants. Shin decided to meet with Dan's. Tsunade didn't stop him. She didn't think there was any danger. He arrived at Dan's tent. Several root agents stood guard outside. Shin could sense their presence with his heightened senses. He had encountered root agents before and was familiar with their chakra signature. He ignored them and entered the tent. They didn't stop him. Dan's must have given them orders. Inside, Dan's was waiting for him. This was the first time Shin had properly met Dan's. Their first encounter had been a brief one when Shin first arrived in Konoha. The current Dan's was different. He hadn't implanted all those Sharingan in his body yet. But his aura was still dark and sinister. It was different from Orochimaru's, but even more unpleasant. Shin disliked him instantly. He had tried to capture him and kill Tsunade. Shin had no good feelings towards him. Uzumaki Shin. Dan's looked up at Shin. Dan-sama, what do you want with a chunin like me? Shin smiled, but Dan's hated that smile. He had learned that his subordinates had been killed by Shin. He wanted to kill the brat. But he held back. He had investigated and confirmed that it was indeed Shin who had repelled the third Kazekage and forced the Suna forces to retreat with his powerful ice release jutsu. To be able to defeat the Kazekage and repel the Suna forces alone. Although Dan's hated to admit it, he was no match for Shin. If you have nothing to say, I'll be taking my leave. Shin saw Dan's hesitant expression and turned to leave. Wait. Dan stopped him. He had summoned Shin for a reason. Chapter 78, 78, Bonus, What is root Dan-sama? If you have something to say, spit it out. I don't have time to waste. Shin said with a nonchalant air. Dan's glared at Shin, his arrogance infuriating. Despite addressing him with the proper honorifics, Shin's lack of respect was clear. Dan's was delusional. Expecting respect from Shin was like expecting Hiruzen to step down and hand him the Hokage hat. Uzumaki Shin, your strength is impressive. Would you be interested in joining Root? Dan suppressed his anger and extended the invitation. If Shin joined Root, he would forget about the deaths of his subordinates. Shin was clearly more valuable. Root? What's Root? I've never heard of it. Is it some insignificant organization? Shin feigned ignorance. Dan's couldn't hold back anymore. His cage-level chakra exploded outwards, his eyes narrowed dangerously. Why so worked up, Dan-sama? Is this Root thing your creation? If so, I must criticize your marketing strategy. I've never even heard of it. Shin said with a straight face, though he was struggling to contain his laughter. If he laughed, Dan's would explode. He knew Dan's wasn't known for his patience. If that's all you wanted, Dan-sama, then goodbye. I have no interest in some unknown organization. Shin didn't give Dan's a chance to respond and used the body flicker jutsu to disappear. Dan's face was a mask of fury. Uzumaki Shin, I'll remember this. He snarled. Shin, of course, didn't hear him. And even if he did, he wouldn't care. He wasn't afraid of fighting Dan's. He was strong enough to escape even a full-on assault from a hidden village. With that kind of power, he didn't have to be cautious or play nice. If he wanted to keep a low profile, he wouldn't have attacked the Suna forces. That display had revealed a portion of his true strength. He had another reason for attacking, though, a system mission he had received a few months ago. The mission was to help Konoha win the Second Shinobi World War. The reward was a divine replication card. There was no penalty for failure. He didn't want to fail, though. A divine replication card was too precious. It was a choice-based mission. He could choose to help any of the 6 villages involved in the war: Konoha, Suna, Iwa, Kumo, Kiri, or Omegakure. The reward was the same regardless of which village he chose. He had chosen Konoha. Konoha was likely to win anyway, and he was a Konoha shinobi. Helping Konoha win the war wasn't a difficult task. He might not even have to do anything. But that was assuming there were no unexpected events. The timeline had already diverged, anything was possible. Regardless, Shin was determined to get that divine replication card. With it, he could copy the Rinnegan. Madara Uchiha's Rinnegan was currently with Nagato. Trying to steal it was out of the question. If Shin tried to take the Rinnegan, Madara would definitely intervene. Shin had never considered stealing the Rinnegan anyway, he preferred his own eyes. He wouldn't transplant someone else's. He could evolve his own eyes, there was no need for a transplant. And transplanted eyes were never fully compatible with the new host. Nagato couldn't even use the Rinnegan's full power. Even if Shin could use it better than Nagato, he probably wouldn't be able to match Madara. But the eyes copied with the system's replication cards were different. They would be perfectly compatible with him. "You're back." Tsunade approached Shin curiously. What did Dans want? Kushina and Mikoto also gathered around, eager to hear what that shady character was up to. They also wanted to warn Shin. Nothing much. He wanted me to join Root, Shin said. Tsunade nodded. That wasn't surprising. Dans would definitely try to recruit Shin. Was that all? Kushina asked. He probably had other motives. Maybe he's interested in my ice release. But I didn't give him a chance to elaborate. Shin had gone to see Dans to annoy him, to see his angry expression. He had succeeded. Dan's face had been livid. No wonder you came back so quickly. He must have been furious, Tsunade chuckled. But knowing that old geezer, he'll definitely try to get back at you. Tsunade's smile vanished. Dans was vindictive. Shin had angered him, there would be repercussions. It doesn't matter. Shin wasn't afraid of Dan's revenge. If Dans pushed him too far, he wouldn't hesitate to kill him. He glanced at Kushina and Mikoto. He wasn't worried about Dan's revenge on himself, but he was worried about them. He thought of a solution, the transcription seal. He could seal his Manjiki Sharingan abilities into their eyes, set to activate under certain conditions. Itaka had implanted the Amaterasu transcription seal in Sasuke's eye, set to activate if he saw Obito's Sharingan. Shin knew how to use the transcription seal, but he hadn't tested it yet. He didn't want to risk using it on Kushina and Mikoto without being sure it was safe. But that was easily solved. He just needed a test subject. And finding one was easy. They were in the middle of a war with Suna. He could just capture a Suna shinobi. Shin decided to do just that. He wondered which unlucky Suna shinobi would be his test subject. How's Konan's training coming along? Shin asked, patting Konan's head. Still refining chakra, Konan replied, nuzzling his hand. She seemed to enjoy his head pats. Thanks for watching.